And let's check this is working. It's still going live. It's live! Yippee! It is live. Ah, that was explaining why it's causing so much. It's so delayed. Ah, that's dealt with. That's gone. That's gone. That's gone. All those things are gone. That's good. Now it's going to work at good speed. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? Okay, let's see if I can find that. Yes, hello. Republic, education, everything's going. That's good. Hello, how are we doing? And we've got the chat live. Woohoo! Chat's working. Hello, Hieroglyph. I can hear you. I'm glad you can hear me. I can talk to you. Scorpion 2651. Hello. Hello, Peter Dawson. You got here first. You said you've sent me something on Discord. I've been recording all day, and yeah, I'm trying to get all the ones for next week done. Okay, yeah, please note, in future, I am not going to set myself the task of 14 independent videos about, let's see, must be nearly 10 castles, a king, a master architect, an introduction and a summary. Hey. Hello, Captain C4. Don't think I see anyone. YouTube playing up. There was no scheduled live until about 5 minutes ago. YouTube's playing up. Simplecast is playing up. I'm having fun with all of them this week. I know it's not SimSec's fault. Bilge Pumps will be going live at some point. Probably at this point, I will be. When I'm on a ferry tomorrow, I will be sorting out Simplecast from the ferry. Oh, hello, Greg Satowski. Hello, Centurion X. Hello, DGB40. Hello, Albazaski. Hello, Yickers. Hello, Seneca Nero. Just finished the other video today. Happy Canada Day. Oh, is it Canada Day? My viewership will be down by about a 50% if it's Canada Day. They'll all be off in pubs singing of logs. Yes, it is Canada Day. They're all off singing of pubs and singing of logs and maple leaves, aren't they? Hello, cousin George. Yes, if you're watching, that one was to wind you up. So yes, I have a cousin in Canada, and well, I have several cousins in Canada, but I have one who I like to wind up by. And I will never sing this on YouTube because I do not want to be killed by the nation of Canada. But occasionally I change certain songs of the Canadian nation into one about logs and maple leaves to wind up a cousin. Hello, Nicholas Gross. Yeah, because I have my logs at home to sing about. Well, watching live. Hello, Carl Gasberg. Hello, Jay Risner. Hello, RAF. Hello, Dr. Clark. Still working my way through your early upload, but better to catch you live. Is your is your audience really that Canadian? It is, actually. My audience is about third Canadian. It's about half American. No, it's about, let's see. America is if you were sort of broadly speaking it, about 96% of my audience splits into thirds, but almost equally American, Canadian, British. And I love them all. And then I have the rest of the world filled up about 4%. A hearty chunk from Australia. Especially when it's lives. Carl goes, how come I got the notification 2 minutes after start? I have no idea, Carl. Oh, trust me, I can do bad things to every national anthem. It's pretty much my party trick for when I'm at a King's College function and we're all out drinking. Well, let's sort of say everyone else is out drinking alcohol. I'm drinking Iron Brew, and what I do is try and see how at what point they reach the level of alcohol intake that I can get them singing corrupted versions of their national anthems and then record it for future blackmail purposes. You see, all those people who try for inappropriate pictures and all those things, no, that's not blackmail. No, that's not. Videos of people singing their national anthem badly and incorrectly, that's blackmail. Especially if some of them have ambitions on working in national defence academies, because that's the sort of thing which, how do I put this? Armed forces personnel, especially student ones, will never let their professors live down. Second, how many Germans? Not as... a fair number. Blackmail, use it to get a position. I've never been that cruel. I don't think it's worth that much. Maybe, if I got a head of department doing it. So, if we want to be slightly worried about my iron brew consumption, so I started the week with 18 cans. No cans left. I started the week with one glass bottle of 1901, which, as you know, this was on Sunday. That's gone. The only iron brew I have left in the entire house is this 1.5 litre bottle. There was a pack of 4. So we can all work out my weekly consumption of iron brew, and also the fact that I haven't slept much in the last few days, hence the need for consuming so much iron brew. Hello, Stafford Thompson. Hello, how you doing? How many Liechtensteiners? I don't know. Nicholas Agras, Canadian ambassador's wife, was once quoted saying, "Do you think anyone would pay attention to Canada if we invaded South Dakota?" I don't think North Dakota would notice if the Canadians invaded South Dakota, other than possibly going, "Hallelujah, we can now be Canadian." I think North Dakota would actually probably get on better with their, Canadian overlords. Syndicate, are you drinking any water? Just iron brew. I'm drinking water and I'm drinking milk. And iron brew. So don't worry, I am drinking more than just iron brew. Don't worry, Stafford. It's very thankful that you do that every day. So, as you all know, it's not the Battle of Philippine Sea 77 years ago today. But these are the slides I used when I did the long patrol topic. And, well, I thought it was a cool place to begin with those slides, because that's really the starting point. And I will add this in now, because we've got to nearly the 10-minute mark, and I should have pointed this out earlier. If you want the full history of the battle, blow-by-blow account, as I provided the other week in the Long Patrol, go watch the Long Patrol. This is, if that was the lecture, this is the seminar. So this is going to be very much questions from you about the points I raised, questions about the slides, and me responding to questions. So it's not going to be me sort of presenting much in terms of going through and giving a presentation and then taking questions. It's going to be very much a discursive discussion of the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, AK, and the Kantay Quezon, and the whole ideas behind it. And especially this has been the case because of the experience I had the other day when I recorded a podcast with World War II history podcasts. And the reason I'm saying, especially because the more we're thinking about that and talking through naval aviation, the more I realise that you have to almost continually restate the point that aviation is not a zero-sum game, that naval aviation is not a right or wrong answer. because different nations have different needs and they have to evolve. They evolve in different ways, and then it goes doubly so when you're talking about their strategy. Mm-hmm. It's fun times, basically. It's all fun. And I am going to quickly share this all on Twitter and say, hashtag naval history. It should be fun. It should be a fun discussion. Mm-hmm. J. Reisner. J. Reisner. Thanks for your great response. My last name is pronounced Reisner. Okay. I hope I got that right. If I got it wrong again, I'm sorry. John Shea, hello. Hello, Doctor. Sorry, mate. Just finished your long patrol today. What did I miss? We're just starting. And I was explaining that because I did a long patrol on this topic, this is going to be very much seminar style, i.e. discussion and questions from you and from the chat. Hello, Yickers. Nicholas Gross. Have you been talking to Nicholas Moran, the chieftain? Not yet, but I'm hoping to soon. And actually, that's one of the things, because while I'm away next week, there is actually the first event, wargaming event is happening that I'm actually not, and I'm not actually, that I've been invited to, but I'm actually not able to go to because I'm away doing research. And I was really hoping to meet the chieftain, and I was really hoping to meet the other one they have who's really good on tanks. Oh, let me remember who she is. I'm going to get her name right because I have two I want to meet and discuss amphibious tanks with, because we all know that my area of armour that I'm really, really interested in is amphibious armour. And I do a lot on that and a lot of work on that. And it's one of those things I like to look at. I like to sort of go and do the research in and go and sort of talk about. So the chieftain and, oh, who is she? Brain will kick this out very shortly. Brain work. Goodness gracious me, I tweet a lot. This is when you realise just how many thousands of tweets you send a day when you're trying to search for a tweet for a name. And you're going, what I think she's known as Sophie Gaming. She's one of the World of Tanks people and work, and basically her and the chieftain I want to have a chat with at some point. And I'd like them to get them on bilge pumps actually to talk about amphibious armour and talk about its role. I know Spitfire Philly. I know Spitfire Philly well. Victoria is a superstar, and I am quite happy to say anyone who's rude about Victoria will get me very annoyed at them. There are a few academics who I'm very protective of. Mainly because they get a lot of twaddle that's thrown at them on Twitter, and hers is all the stuff about Nazi Germany. My girlfriend's rather more quiet on Twitter. She never she doesn't sort of do a lot of publication of her own work, etc. on Twitter. In fact, I'm not even really quite sure what her account is on Twitter. She's keeping it secret from me. so I don't include it in things. I think, and make her stick and possibly get her involved in the Twitterverse before she wants to be involved in it, because I think she thinks it takes up too much of my time as it is. And there are some academics who get a lot of stick on Twitter, and Victoria's one of them, and she shouldn't be. Right. Let's see. Modern 6292. Hello. So Thompson. 840. Hurricane. Oh god, I get to watch the Battle of the Philippine Sea live without risking drinking vodka and brew. You've combined vodka and iron brew. That is actually a pretty interesting cocktail. One of my friends in Scotland does a iron brew and absinthe mix, and honestly, after watching friends drinking that, I'm not surprised. Absinthe is illegal in so many countries. So no. And was this before or after Samar, where Musashi got destroyed and Yamato got routed by a destroyer? I think it's before, but I'm not quite sure. Before, I think. Customers, how have people not gone totally insane from Twitter at this point? There is a certain point at which they're going to. Right. Yickers, thanks for getting me into World War II TV. After your first appearance, I went into his catalogue. There are some great talks, but I was guessing you included. Yes, World War II TV is amazing. They are lovely people. One of the things I have to say that's come out of COVID is there's a lot of amazing free history out there, which you're all supporting, and with Patreon and all these things, and watching on the videos and YouTube and the adverts. And it's really causing an explosion in interactive history. It's been amazing. I don't think the world's going to reset. I can see it keep going. But it's great if it can provide sort of people with more entry points into history. That's nonsense. If I disappear at any point, it's due to oil changes on your Dodge. And the first one of Mum's new Kia. Good luck. RF Fury, who would do that to Iron Brew? Oh, lots of people do weird stuff with Iron Brew. It's quite fun, though. I don't drink it, I just tend to watch it. I don't always use vodka, I mostly use brandy. That's worrying, Furican. Strump, do you think the US could have done as well using the F4 Wildcat, or did the F6 Wildcat make that much of a difference? I think the F6 is the Hellcat, from memory. Yeah, the F6F is the Hellcat. They probably could have done almost as well with the Wildcat because they could have carried more of them, but honestly, by that point in the war, you do need the Hellcat. The sheer power and grunt of my favourite aircraft, and I'm looking... It's still in my bedroom, my lovely Hellcat model, but they are gorgeous, and the Hellcat is possibly my favourite aircraft of World War II. It's, I know, I get into trouble quite regularly with various people go, you should be a British aircraft, why don't you like the Spitfire or something? They're all lovely aircraft, yes, but the Hellcat is my favourite in World War II. I just love it because it is just this pure thing. It's an engine with wings attached. That is what the Hellcat is. And it is so freaking rugged and reliable. And unlike the Corsair, it doesn't have a deep-seated desire to kill its own pilot every time it's trying to land. The Hellcat will actually, look after its pilot. That, makes me love it. Oh, I will ask about tank boats as well, AdFab. But, I've already been doing that on Twitter. Oh. Nicholas Cross, what changes did the Japanese and Americans make between Midway and the Marianas? What changes did they not make that they should have? Well, the Japanese should have put an admiral in charge. I'm sorry, the command structure, and we'll get to this in more detail later, was an absolute nightmare. And command structures are based on actual positions, but they're also relationships. And the thing is, if you have relationships where everyone's of theoretically the same rank and everyone's checking when they are promoted and their time in post to work out who's technically senior despite the role and the position of them, you have a problem. So you make someone a freaking admiral. And they actually do have admirals around there. They have Nagumo, who has been benched for a reason, but Honestly, they could have made one of these other losses admirals. And what the Americans do in between is the Americans are refining their air defense. They are training up their fighters a lot. A lot. And that's the big change. What I would have liked to seen the Americans do is... honestly, their fleet's pretty hot stuff. It's capable up for the Philippines, between Midway and the Marianas. But the Japanese, what they really need to do... what the Japanese needed to do was take all their veteran pilots, as many of them home after Midway as they've got still alive, and plug them into their training program and start really training up their air crews, rather than shoveling out brand new air crews into a death-defying scenario where they're just going to get pounced by veterans. Distinguished chemists. I will have to remember him as well. My Alvin Shoulders. What's your choice to drink tonight? Iron brew. It's, if in doubt, lives, it's iron brew. Evan Shoulders. Oh, no, Furican. No, that's not that. Adfab. Spitfire, Phillies, Morsel, enemy. Oh, good lord. Jay Reisner. Sophie is awesome, and yeah, they are great. Modern 6292. Gonna have to try this iron brew. It comes highly recommended from your drive. Yes, we're both addicts to it. And you can be very worried about the supply, because we are both going to be in the same place next week. So that place is going to be running out of iron brew rather quickly. Carl Gasway. And there is a real sanitized commercial one. Yes. Very good one. Dr. Mary Beard got a whole lot of trolling, though I heard she met one of the worst and talked to him. Mary Beard gets a lot of stuff. She gets, called into all sorts of debates, and she offers her opinion. And her opinion doesn't always match what's popular. I don't always agree with her opinion. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But, the thing is, if it's their opinion, it's their opinion. Hello, old Richard. Yeah, you're gonna be having fun soon, old Richard, because I've taken your patron idea and your suggestion, and I've turned it into the cover. The weeks I'm going to be away later in July and August. Hurricane. Yeah. Hieroglyph. Seafire lacked range, otherwise very good. Yeah. Can't go smoke. Re-Hellcat. However, the Wildcat stays in service as it fits the CVE nicely. Exactly. It becomes a perfect thing for the escort carriers. And that's a good thing. We were having this discussion on bilge pumps the other day. You need something for the second line carriers. For the escort carriers. And the trouble is, at the moment, if you consider it, because of the way escort carriers are formed, the only option is an F-35B. And that's not really a second line fighter in anyone's strength in the idea of the world. Hello, the happy Wyvern. One I quite enjoyed the look of it is a Tiger Cat. Oh yes, she's cool. Pete Dawson. Corsair, do you mean Blackburn Firebrand? Both of them have a tendency to try and wipe out their pilots occasionally. The Blackburn Firebrand is pretty cool. Furican, you mean you're not a fan of the battle? No. So much. I suspect the massive increase in interest is a lot to do it. Some of the new channels seem to be trying to capitalise on it with regurgitation of yours and Drax work to get hits. You can tell all because of the clickbaits. Well, there. If it's spreading around, it's spreading around. Me, it's always slightly more difficult, I think, to reproduce, because my style tends to be slightly more discursive. If you copy mine, there will be ums and ahs in there, because it's lecture style, and it's like I'm giving a lecture. because I have what I don't work for, and I have actually joked to Drac on occasion we should swap just for once, just to see how we do our different styles. So he writes out a script and really professionally puts it together. But with my electric experience, what I have is I have a series of bullet points, and you can't see it, but my screen is divided in two. Here, I have half the screen, so I have two screens. I have one screen showing the video and what it's doing at the moment, and the other screen is divided in two and has on one side the live chat and on the other side my bullet points and my notes, and I work through the bullet points. I don't have a sort of script of it. I have points I want to hit on the way. So that's why I can go through the same presentation 3 times. I will cover the same points. None of them will ever sound the same. But that's because I'm used to having to give lectures 3 times over, and I find it boring as anything for me if I'm repeating exactly the same thing. But it would be fun to swap around. But it does make it also, I think, more difficult for people to try to copy what I'm saying. Because I'm more random. It's different. Derp Squad. The Hellcat was able to fight the A6M0 as an equal, just as powerful, though in different ways. The Wildcat couldn't climb the 0-0. Yeah, Japanese did use that for many kills, but the Wildcat did have various other maneuvers it could do, including the FAC weave, where it would just go because it could turn, and it was rugged and reliable. And then you add in the FAC weave, and you have Hellcats doing, and it's a nightmare for the Japanese. Agreed, Stafford. Friggin', does the A1 owe a little nod to the IL-2 and IL-10? A10 owe a little... A10, yeah, a little nod. A very little one. Japanese need to make peace negotiations. The Japanese strategy was about the decisive battle. This is the point. It's not necessarily a bad strategy, and if we, I just want to expand this because I know people want to see this picture because it's a lovely picture. And then we go to this one. The Japanese strategy wasn't necessarily a bad strategy if it's properly executed. By the time they're executing it, they can't do it. That's the point. By the time they're trying to execute the Kantai Kessen for this sort of the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Japanese fleet doesn't exist as it did in 1941. The time to execute the Kantai Kessen is Pearl Harbor. You either do the Kantai Kessen at Pearl Harbor, or you don't do Pearl Harbor that way. For example, if I'd been the Japanese and I'd wanted to do Pearl Harbor in a way that was going to sting the Americans and force them to come trouble, I'd have sent a single carrier in, launched one strike on Pearl Harbor, pissed off the Americans, excuse the French, and had them charge out following me, and then when they're at sea, following me back into my area where I have more forces, have my battleships, have my carriers at a distance closer to Japan, and then attack them. You either have to attack Pearl Harbor and go fully after it, land troops, do the full army intervention, and turn Pearl Harbor into your decisive battle, where you wipe out everything that the American fleet has in Pearl Harbor, the staff, the lot. Or, and I think in the long patrol, I think I said Nimitz, and of course it isn't Nimitz at that point. I do apologise, I was getting my American admirals in the wrong order. Or you don't. Or you spurn them into coming out after you. You don't do what the Japanese did, which was, we've done a load of damage, we're going away. Because then that just allows the Americans to build up. And when the Americans eventually come at you, they're going to come at you with their full force. And it's going to be massive. All you've done at that point is delayed the battle, and that doesn't work for the Japanese. The Japanese need the battle to take place at a point at which they are stronger than their American counterparts. And that is a very small window in 1941, beginning of 1942. And any point at which the battle takes place after then, no longer are they in that scenario, and the Americans are building out full tilt. So even if you win the battle, all you're going to do is face a bigger battle down the road. Abzaki, don't forget about training IJ and Tae crew on IJ and Tae crew on damage control. Yeah. Furikin, the best thing the IJN could have done is attack their true enemy, the Japanese Imperial Army. That's an entire another relationship scenario we could get into. How was it that Japanese aviation just seemed to stall during the war? Where war was a massive driver for everyone else. War wasn't necessarily a massive driver for everyone else. The point is, what happens is you develop technologies in peacetime. And then at a certain point, either approaching the war or during the war, you top off and take those technologies and develop them into something practical you can use in wartime. Okay, I have to admit, there are items like radar, which is continual development, but that's been being developed since for a long time by the time it's implemented as well. Most of the aircraft you're talking about, one of the interesting things that often comes into people, I often explain to people is, in 1939, when Britain goes to the war, it has the Swordfish in service, which everyone goes, shows they weren't naval-minded. Well, I've been over the popularity of the Swordfish before. But then it also has the Albacore entering service to replace it, and it's working on the Barracuda, which is supposed to succeed the Albacore. So that's the kind of development cycle you're talking about. The Barracuda doesn't come really into service till 1944-45. It's not sped up by war. It takes about the time it's going to take anyway to develop it and get it right. In fact, it's probably delayed by war because of all the efforts going into other things. Because what happens in war is some technology can be rapidly turned into equipment which can be turned into warfighting. And other technology is put to one side. And sometimes you then pick it up and go, well, hang on, we've got a situation we're going to need that technology, so we'll start developing it now. But war doesn't really act as a catalyst for technological development in terms of accelerating it. It accelerates the introduction of technology, not the creation of new technology, as a rule. Carmen, what's up with bilge pumps? Simple cast, and I will fix it. It will be live. It will go live. Nicholas Gross. What did the British use for carrier aircraft at this stage in the war? By 1944, you have Hellcats, you have Corsairs, you have Grumman Avengers, and you have, I think, Barracudas starting this, and you have Seafires. And you have Wildcats and Swordfish on escort carriers doing convoy work, because frankly, again, they're the best for it. Furikin, how about a load of Harriers instead? Not necessarily a superiority fighter, but still reasonable platform and bomb track. Unfortunately, you'd have to restart the Harrier production line. All the airframes are out of flight life, basically. Seneca, as someone coming from Naval History School of Big Guns, cool. Manchester Naval Aviation was pretty limited until recently. I hope I've helped with that. I do agree, though, Carl goes well, the Harrier with a decent radar, data link, AMRAAM, or Meteor is still a decent fighter. It was okay. Avon Childers, do you teach at university? Yes. Timo Loka. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Furikin, at which point does 5 + 5 versus 3 seem a good idea? At no point. That's good. The experienced Japanese pilots worked out a counter to the FAC weave after the first battle was employed at. They were never rotated to training, so knowledge was lost. Exactly. I think it was called the, what did they call it? The counter to the FAC weave. Was it called the SIB? Or something. It translates to something very, a kitchen implement in when it's translated in English, but it's not, it does not really means that. Furrican, sometimes you can kite, but you need good healers on your team. Not sure. Nicholas Cross, wouldn't they apparently be stronger at Midway? Not really, because whilst yes, they're stronger, that they are. How do I put it? Midway we get into, but in Midway's advantage is, of course, the Americans by that point have the intelligence advantage, and the Japanese don't know where they are, which means they don't have the advantage. The other advantage at Pearl Harbor at that point is the Japanese know exactly where the Americans are. Sorry, Cajun, no spare kneecap. Considering it, should the Japanese have sued for peace after this battle? They would never sue for peace. It possibly would have been sensible, but they didn't. That's good. The Japanese were upgrading Zero throughout the war, and the IJ developed many new aircraft types during the war. Main problem is a desperate shortage of raw materials to build planes. True, and there are limitations to what you can do to Zero airframe. You know, you can have new aircraft, and you can develop technology, but you can't implement it. This is the point I was making. Technology is great. We've developed this. Let's see. Now, this is a brilliant little piece of kit. Let's say I developed, during World War II, the idea of how to create a screwdriver which I could do that with the handle of. And it would be battery powered. Brilliant, wouldn't it? But it's going to take another, let's say, 5 million person hours, work hours, to turn it into something which can be mass produced. Well, that's 5 million work hours I can't use for something else. Is this going to save enough hours in the rest of the war that it's worthwhile doing? I would argue yes. But you might argue no. And then there's the resources for it. So this is the point I was making about technology and war. And in the end, you go, well, that's lovely, but this does the job. And it requires no hours to develop. So I'm just going to stick with this and use those hours for something else. If memory serves, even at this point it was made clear that only unconditional surrender is acceptable for Japan. Pretty much. B-29 is a wartime project. That is one of the exceptions. Really? You would call the American bomber program a wartime project? Mm-hmm. Now, Boeing had started work on long-range pressurized bombers in 1938, but I'm sure that the bomber which flies in first flights in September 1942, that just is a wartime project. War begins in 1941. In April 1939, Lindbergh is pushes for a new bomber in large numbers to counter German production. December 1939, the Air Corps issues a formal specification for a super bomber. And Boeing submitted its model 345 on the 11th of May 1940. Yeah. Again, you are not wrong. There are a lot of people, a lot of history which comes out which goes, this is a wartime development, because the actual specific aircraft is arguably wartime development. It has its first flight during wartime. It has its First, all its operational development, all these things are in wartime, but it's not really wartime if you consider that, honestly, it's building on research and technology developed from 1938, which is building on research and technology which is started back in 1930. It's using a lot of technology which is coming from various other sources, which are being implemented into it. So, yes, it's a wartime development, but the specific aircraft might be wartime, but the technology for it has been developed a long time, and arguably it started its own development back in about 1940. Well, Carmen, Wendo, I'm having withdrawals from my here. I need my bilge. I will try and get it up tonight then. I'll try and get the argument tonight. Hi. Oh, Richard, some argued the unconditional surrender declaration from the Terran prolonged the war. Yes and no, but it was also the only thing at that point which the Allied leaders could accept. Because, and here is the point, the Soviets were not prepared to accept anything but an unconditional surrender from the Germans. Neither were the Brits, really. The Brits weren't prepared to accept it from the Japanese, anything but an unconditional surrender from the Japanese, because they weren't going to allow them to hold on to their territorial gains. The Americans weren't either for the Japanese. So no one was prepared to accept a conditional surrender from the same opponent. Marcus Osmason, hello. Is it as insane as sounds to have Avengers, but apparently without torpedoes, as the British torpedo was too big, but the US one wasn't brought by the Brits? Why not buy dive bombers? Because the Brits didn't like dive bombs at that point. You have to remember, by the point at which you've got the whole point of the idea of dive bombers, the British are using their fighters as doing dive bomb attacks with their fighters. Their fighters can take the bombs, do sort of most of the role of dive bombing. So what they're looking at for their aircraft, especially the Avengers, is a torpedo strike aircraft, which I think they could take the torpedoes of. Not sure though. I think the British did have torpedoes for them. Possibly in the British Pacific Fleet they had American torpedoes, and just not in Britain. But also they were using them for bomb strikes, and actually, in the nicest way, as a bomb truck to attack land targets. The Avenger can carry a lot more bombs than a dive bomber. Nicholas Ross, does only the US have the luxury of being able to do production development at the same time? US is the only one with the space and the freedom to do it. Britain does do some of it. Japan does do a bit, and Germany does do a bit, but it's basically America not only has the space, but also doesn't have anyone bombing it and all the other problems caused by war fighting to be able to focus and do it without too much trouble. Trent Alanko, hello Trent. Japanese aviation had a very hard time walking and chewing gum at the same time. Design talent was first rate. The engineering production capacity of engines and fuels wasn't. No, it really wasn't. Japanese planes were at 70 to 80 octane in 1945, when US planes were 150 octane. It really does make a difference in performance, especially at high altitudes. True. So the US completely upgraded their aerial torpedoes in stages throughout the war. By the end, they were reliable and could be dropped much higher and faster. Yes, by the end of the war, they had basically gone and had a long conversation with the Brits about our aerial torpedoes and gone, how do you do it? How did Toronto actually work? And the Brits went, well, we stabilised the torpedo on this axis. And the Americans went, we don't want to use a wire like you guys. That's sad. We're going to figure out a different way of doing this, and expensively went through and developed it. But it's helpful for modern torpedo technology, so it's useful. A hieroglyph. Japan did sue for peace, but no one did not accept unconditional surrender. Pretty much. Death Squad, even if the Japanese had sued for peace after the Philippine Sea, there's no guarantee the US would have accepted negotiating peace. No. When the US decide on unconditional, pretty much the moment Pearl Harbor. I'm worried about you, furry kid. I really am. Adfad, the Manhattan Project seems to be war-driven. It's war-driven, but again, a lot of the theory and a lot of the work has been done pre-war. It's just with when war starts, Manhattan Project, you bring together all the different research teams that have already been working on it, put them together, and basically go, we want to turn this into something practical now. That's good. One of the major problems the Japanese had in aircraft development was that everything was duplicated between the IJ and IJN. They didn't share knowledge, so everything had to be learned separately twice. Every tweak to engines to gain horsepower. Yeah. It made development very expensive, very resource intensive. Japan couldn't afford that. No, it couldn't. That's good. The US is one of the major exceptions of wartime development, as the US home wasn't a threat. Also had enough resource to throw out both building and R&D simultaneously. Yeah, the British managed to do mainly thanks to the Empire. You'll find various research gets done in places like South Africa, Canada, Australia, at different points, and Britain does it as part of itself as well. But it's difficult to coordinate and do. Furrican, Illusion had done pressurized long-range aircraft prior to that, and also extreme altitude aircraft. Yeah, it wasn't new tech. Team Looker, what would have happened if Vice Admiral Xing Li would have been responsible for the US side of this engagement? I know it's a what-if question, it's been bugging me. It's an interesting question. It depends on what role you put him in. Do you put him in the... I'm gonna quickly jump through that. Do you put him in the Mitcher role or the Spruance role? If he's in the Spruance role, I don't see much difference. If he's in the Mitcher role, he's not really a carrier admiral, but knowing Xing Li, fairly aggressive and knows his carriers are up to it, so I think he would be launching the strikes as early as he can be. I don't think he'd be waiting for them to come to him, as Spruance was doing. Spirican, it was in development, but it may have been accelerated before, e.g. axial centrifugal flow turbines and microwave radar. I will... To an extent. To an extent. Let's go with to an extent. That's a good historical way to put it in the middle. Steve Winnish, well, what they wanted was to keep a piece of Manchuria and all of Korea. That was never going to happen. No. Especially as the Russians had plans on Manchuria and Korea. Alright. Sorry, Ken. Most of the electronics prior to the mass production of thermonic valve was semiconductor based on metal sulfides. Faraday was working on these prior to the concept of dynamism. Needs drive productions. Need drive production. Yeah, it does. See, when unconditional surrender was a deal made with Stalin, who was worried about the Brits making a separate peace. To be fair, the Brits were also worried about the Soviet Union making a separate peace because the Soviet Union. Let's be honest, the Soviet Union had prior on this one in that the Soviet Union had agreed to originally to divide up Poland with Nazi Germany and had basically been an ally of Nazi Germany in all but actual war fighting prior to some events in World War II. So the British were not that trusting of Stalin, and neither were the Americans. Pete Dawson, in 44, Avengers did some dive bombing. Also Barracudas and Fairy Fireflies. Yeah. We'll call that dive bombing. It's not really... It's called sometimes dive bombing, but I would call it more skip dive bombing, but leave that to one side. There's a different style. There's a zoom boom, and there's a and all sorts of things going on. Um, hmm. So, didn't some science fiction magazine figure out something was happening at Los Alamos because a lot of their subscribers moved there? I think there was a science magazine which figured it out. Possibly a science fiction magazine as well, but there were a few who considered their most prominent subscribers disappeared off to Los Alamos. See, which they did not have breeder tech until 1942. Without it, no bomb was only theoretical. Same problem the Nazis had getting stuck on deuterium is the answer. Yes, but they were developing that technology. They didn't have it till 1942, but it had been in development long before 1942, is what I'm saying. Hieroglyph. I think Higgin boats are about the only example of something being truly invented during the war. All the rest, pre-war inventions just getting refined. Go back to the video I did on landing craft, which included Higgins boats. That's got my response to that one in. Team Locker, in the Musha roll. In the Musha roll, Chingli is probably going to do the same as Misha because in certain points he's going to push it, and at other points he's not going to. He'll push it as much as he can. That's good. I can guess conducting research development is much easier when your lab only explodes when you made a mistake and not when the bombardier hasn't. True. Hieroglyph. In Japan could have kept Manchurian Korea in 1937. Yeah. So Johnson, another one for the t-shirt line, to an extent, along the classics, in the nicest way and why. Oh. Sure, a good Sessa. I can't think of any way of doing it earlier with any Germany. Possibly, if Uncle Adolf had been assassinated or deposed somehow. Possibly. Engenders. Why did the Allies not use Rubel as a base? Did they choose the Mariners instead? It comes down to logistics. And it comes down to distance of things and getting your own logistics to the base. To there. Brestella Vostok Treaty. I don't forget it, Keaton. Death Squad. I think both UK and US were aware, even in 1941, that the Soviet Union would become a major belligerent power once the common enemy against Germany was no longer an issue. Yeah. There was never any doubt it would be a problem at some point. It's interesting how much wartime development came post-war, e.g. time taken Lancaster to Vulcan or B-29 to B-52. Development was done on swept wings, and now an Airbus is basically a 707. Too much. Rabaul would have cost a lot of lives, and there are plenty of other natural harbours and airfields around. But logistically also it's not as good a point. Have a look at these islands and see. Right. So, you have Truk. You have... Eventually you'll have Iwo on the various other points. What are you trying to get to? Where do you want to go? Mariana Islands are a good place to be basing on. Especially if you consider, if you're coming from Midway, Wake Island to the Marianas, it's a straight line. And you can do that and protect that. So you always have to think about these things not just from the purposes of what's easy for you to attack and why you're attacking, but also what's easiest for you to resupply. Hurricane, when you end up with Shadwick, Switzerland, Boer et al. In the same place, inquiring minds that need to know. That's true. That's good. I think the difference that a war makes in research and development is that governments are much more willing to hand out effective bank checks than they ever would in peacetime. Speeds stuff up. It does, and it allows for, how do I put this politely? It allows for a lot more development to go ahead. Governments are prepared to take far more risks. But usually that's in terms of development of something, ideas which already exist and have already been sort of to an extent demonstrated. Unless it's absolutely essential critical problem they have to solve. Sam Thompson, also you could have Nimitz and MacArthur all asking Scott to borrow Snake. Well, that is basically what the Americans are doing. As I said before in the thing, it is the Anaconda plan on Japan. That's it. Okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. The Anaconda plan is good strategy. I know people like to make fun of it because it takes so long, but it's good strategy. And also, here's the other thing. So, the American Civil War lasts from April 1861 to May 1865. So 4 years. The World War II in the Pacific lasts from December 1941 to September 1945. Again, roughly 4 years. It takes roughly a year to implement the plan and roughly 3 years for it to succeed. Now, yes, we do. Japan gets nuked, and that's often considered, that causes the final thing. But honestly, by that point, was Japan really a threat to anyone else? She'd been robbed of all her supplies and all her resources. She was reduced back to her own island. The Allies were coming for her. Or they could have, blockaded and laid siege to it for years if they'd really wanted to. Neither of which were particularly attractive offers and easy ones to implement. But that's what they had going on. It's the Anaconda plan, but it works. Same with the American Civil War. Aglyph, Stalin promised Roosevelt he'd declare war on Japan 90 days after the Nazi surrender. And did. Just in time. Trent Lanka, could the Americans have won any harder? Put B-29s with sea mines in Darwin and Ceylon instead of China. Then mine the Dutch East Indies oil ports. It would have been an interesting option. Very kidding. Why wasn't the B-47 the Stratojet continued, but the B-52 was? If I remember correctly, it's due to the wings, but I'm not 100% sure. Not really my area. Nicholas Gross. For the mariners, could the Japanese have led with their service fleet, closing at night, and then had the service fleet closing as the carrier attacks are coming in? If they'd known where the Americans were, they could certainly have carried it out. But to do that, they'd have had to know where the Americans were. Adfab, was there an agreement with the Soviet Union not to account for the North, e.g. invade Sakhalin? No, there's no agreement, just logistically, do you want to try and launch something from Alaska? That's the point. It's just, again, it's where do you have the supplies? Where do you have the logistics? A mosquito came and landed on my mug. That's just terrible. That's good. It was also useful to how the Japanese tried to continue to supply Rebel in order to sink their merchant fleet. Just isolated and it's no longer a threat. To an extent, yeah. Jack Hunter, evening. Furican, draw a circle of operational air range around the mariners. It's the major point. That's true. The Japanese command structure. Vice Admiral Yasubo Oswa on the Aigen Taiho, and Vice Admiral Taiko Kurito on the Aigen Atago. That's good. War research and development allows the precursors of what is now called DARPA to exist. DARPA to exist. It's a mad idea, but it might work. If it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. Calvin goes with USSR being a problem. See Operation Pike. There were many problems with USSR, even before Operation Pike. Jack Reisner. The Bat Bomb? I mean, we've seen it covered. The mRNA tech is pre-COVID, but got funding blown up up until it came out blown up. So now it's mature enough to do much more post-COVID. True. There are a lot of people who've said it could be that research could well provide a lot of stuff for things like cancer treatments and other treatments going forward. It could be a whole medical revolution that's come out of COVID. Who knows? Do you know when rare Thursday stream? I try and do a live every Thursday I'm at home, because I can do a live from here. Doing a live from other places is slightly more difficult. Megaron, if pressed, what would you say are the three most counterintuitive facts of the Pacific War when explaining it to layman? That the Japanese launched the war of aggression and haven't prepared for it. And usually all those three facts go to it. Like, so the Japanese go to war in 1941, December 1941. When do they get their rapid carrier production program of producing more pilots to their carriers going? Not till really 1943. They have a sort of program in 1942, but it isn't really pumped up and working till 1943. When do they implement their their production of convoy escorts? They don't. They don't have this. They haven't created the yards or the facilities for it. And don't have the resources for it. Despite the fact that they had the same treaty agreement as everyone else for sloops, so they could have been producing as many 1,200, 1,500 ton convoy escorts during the treaty era as they wanted. They could have built a whole host of them and just gone, these are slow convoy escorts who are armed with AA guns and depth charges, and their job is to escort our merchant ships. And they never get a convoy system going. They've got submarines attacking them and they've not got a convoy system. But the most counterintuitive thing of the whole thing is the Japanese are aiming for this whole battle. They're aiming for a Kantai-Kessen. And yet they don't really push for it until it's too late. It's just... Adfam, when was the variable time, the VT fuse investment? Well, they're pre-war designs. There were pre-war designs of it, but again, it's built in during wartime. They're pre-war ideas that are pushed together. Hang on, Operation Starvation was absolutely killing Japan in 1945. Too much. They needed that to give them the face to surrender. I am not sure about the nukes being that deciding factor. I think they pushed them over the edge, but they make what was going to happen anyway happen a lot quicker, and without the necessity of invading. So Thompson, yes, I would say you might well see both sides try and release it. Don't presume that you will just get to implement it on another power. You can hope that's the scenario, but... Although I would say implementing it against America always seems to be more difficult than implementing against anyone else. Mainly because they're the size of a continent, and you have to operate 2 fleets to be able to do it. And that's the problem against America. You have to be able to control their west and east coast to be able to do it on America, and their Canadian border, and the Mexican border. That's why doing it on America is so difficult. That's the answer, Stafford. Lots of discussion of the B-52 going on here. Not really appropriate to the period, but that's fine. It does last a long time. But again, you have to remember one of the first anti-cancer chemotherapy drugs was diacetyl sulfide. Sheer mustard gas. Son of Canary, could it be that the Japanese just thought logistics is for noobs? My job is to fight a war here. Logistics is a continuing trouble for the Japanese. And it's kind of like their stats on this is how many our ships and crews are so superior to the enemy, so therefore this is the equivalence of force. So if the enemy has this many destroyers, we only need this many destroyers to counter them and win. And I sit there and go, no. It's the same logistics. It's full of a lot of interesting thinking and logic. Take care, Nicholas Cross. Scott, I understood that Japan surrendered not because of nukes, but in the hope that they could play the US against the USSR to keep Manchuria and Korea. Not really. They had they might have had ideas about that, but we'll never be sure, and it doubtful it work. And they end up having the whole scenario with that ends up being problematic because there are people who try to resist the surrender and the order to surrender, and the Emperor ends up having to force it. So much Japan surrendered because not all of them were sociopaths, and some actually cared that the population was going to starve. Those not incinerated by both nukes and conventional bombs. I think they were also worried about their own positions, and they couldn't see a way of winning the war. As long as they thought they could win it, still win the war, I doubt they'd have surrendered. Japanese lack of convoy. That and not sending their subs against Allied merchants despite their World War I Adriatic Mediterranean experience and expertise. They were sending their subs against merchant ships. They just didn't have enough of them to go round. And where were the merchant ships? You don't hear about the Japanese and the German and Italian submarine operations in the Indian Ocean. That's where their subs are going against merchant fleets. And they're trying to get round to go against the American convoys. But then, where are the American convoys going to? Where are the American merchant convoys with supply ships going to? This is the point. The Japanese would love to attack merchant fleets and merchant convoys. But where are the merchant convoys in the area they can actually reach? There are some going down to Australia. Woohoo! But you have they can be spread out the whole Indian Ocean, and sometimes they go really far south in the Indian Ocean and then pop up. You know, there's all sorts of options done to minimize risk to these convoys, and the Japanese can't get there. At what point do the Japanese realists realize the game was up? Well, if we go back to this strategy, honestly, it's arguable that Yamamoto before even April 1943 has become convinced that it's up, that the game is over, that they're going to lose. And then Koga dies in March 1944, 11 months later. And of course it's Toyoda who has to put this operation into action. Furikin, given the lack of armour on modern ships, could rapid firing systems like new BAE Bofors 76 Smart Gun give a new rise to the Juno Cole with rapid propulsion? Doubtful, because there's still going to be various other options to respond to. And also, I have a feeling if you look at some of the designs for the Type 20 for future ships coming in, I'm not sure if the lack of armour is going to continue. I think you might well get possibly not massive battleship level sort of thickness of armour, but certainly some solid chunks of metal put into ship designs. Seneca, after this battle, there's no chance for Japan to win. Don't Scott, the Japanese were also unwilling to sink US merchants sailing to Vladivostok for fear of bringing the USSR into war against them. That was certainly something that worried about them, because that would have meant they'd been fighting not just against the Chinese in Manchuria, but against the Russians as well, which is not fun. It's never fun when you're dealing with the Russians at that range. Seeing which, the idea that they either had a quick victory or forget it was widespread. So when it didn't happen, they knew. Hurricane. In real life, the Australian strategy was surrender 3/4 of the continent and then let them suffer the desert. I think the Australians had a slightly more developed strategy than that. Second Nero, could railguns lead to neo-dreadnoughts? They could certainly lead to a return of the large gun cruiser, probably. Shuriken, line of sight hypervelocity shots should be very much a return to film. If we're going to go after the hypervelocity stuff and not into this modern stuff, that's well off topic, but going back to it, because of course this did involve battleships, I have a feeling you would find that with that sort of firepower you can really extend your range and really carry out a sort of a long range beyond sight takeout. Ben Garden, on the idea of the Kantan-Kesson, who, and more importantly, how many admirals would have to be convinced to commit to an earlier major battle? You're basically dealing with the Japanese High Command. And, as I said, the problem for the Kantai-Kesson and for this sort of battle is actually Pearl Harbor. The thing that leads to the Philippine Sea is Pearl Harbor. Because Pearl Harbor simultaneously achieves enough that the Americans don't come out in massive force until they have to start building up their forces. So they don't come out then where you're strongest. And doesn't achieve enough because it doesn't take out the Americans, enough force of the Americans, and take out enough of their officers and enough of their leadership and supplies to give you time to build up more. Because it takes a lot longer for the Japanese to build stuff than it takes the Americans to build stuff. You know, how do I put this? Imagine if the Japanese had managed to push the Americans back, had done enough damage to push them back for another year. So it would add a year onto all those timetables before they come back, before Midway, before all those things. And they managed to use that time to build more ships. So yes, they won't have as many as the Americans have, but the Americans will have to spend a lot of resources rebuilding Pearl Harbor, maybe even retaking Pearl Harbor, if you decide to leave a small but powerful garrison there. You know, if I was the Japanese, I'd be certainly have been tempted to leave a garrison not on Pearl Harbor proper, but on the island in the middle of Pearl Harbor. I'd be tempted to have left a garrison there if I'd stormed it with an amphibious force. And before anyone gets into it, yes, it wouldn't have been easy. Yes, they would have had losses, but again, if the IJN and IJ had combined, the only way to make Pearl Harbor close to the kind of victory you're looking for with a decisive battle is A, to launch those more strikes of aircraft, and B, to land some troops and go and take out those base facilities and make sure not just they're taken out, but the command structures and the personnel are taken out as well. And here's the point. You can say they don't do it because if they had done it, it would have made the war worse. No, you've already attacked American home soil with attacking Pearl Harbor. You've already attacked them at home. You've already done that taboo. Honestly, you're not going to make it that much worse. But if you've got a couple of divisions of veterans from China, they're going to cause a lot of trouble for the Americans if they're landed quick enough in the right spots. See, when railgun kinetics would go right through both sides of the armor belt, causing incredible shock damage on the way. Pretty much. You'd have to have it angled, and you'd have to have the right metallurgy, the right alloy. Then IJN and IJ working together. What next? Cats and dogs? Don't joke about cats and dogs working together. I've seen it happen. Furrican at 0.5 meters squared velocity is king, but suddenly materializing the mass equivalent of a people carrier in the middle of your well-designed ship still causes major troubles. Yeah, it does. But again, you have to remember the point of armor is often different than we think about it. For example, at certain points, the British and Americans both considered the idea of putting on enough armor on a hull to prevent on parts of the hull which they were otherwise going to leave unarmored, to prevent high explosive ammunition from penetrating, because they didn't want a high explosive shell being able to get through the hull and blow up inside, because that would cause a problem. But they didn't care about an armored piercing shell going through, because if that hit, if the armor was the right thickness, it would be thin enough that it wouldn't stop an armor piercing, so that would go straight through and not cause any trouble, but would be stopped the high explosive, which would literally go through a hull and then blow up. This is the point the British and the Americans and lots of people start thinking about when it comes to ship design. And this is something else that we have to sort of consider out if we're talking about railguns, if we're talking about these sort of hypervelocity weapons. What sort of points do we need armor? Do we want armor around things like the CIC and engineering? And the magazines? Do we want, therefore, to have deflecting plates or even decapping plates on the rest of the hull? Do we want to have something which isn't going to stop them, but is going to reduce the energy enough that it isn't going to penetrate into the CIC? Because that's the thing. And that's what you're talking about. You're not talking about stopping it, you're talking about cutting energy from it. Scott, if the USN destroys the fuel stores at Pearl after the IJN has struck around to support landing to do more damage, are the engine able to get home, or are they stuck at Hawaii? Well, here again is the problem. But again, you can go back to it and go, so, if this is your war plan, and we know the Japanese start on developing on Pearl Harbor a long time prior to this, why not build some more tankers? Okay, or buy some more tankers, or find a way. And I know they have limitations in terms of their foreign currency, and I know they have limitations in terms of their production. But if you know this is going to be your target and going to be your strategy, actually start building for your strategy. That's re-breaking the taboo of the attacking US soil, misjudging your actions in importance to the adversary. Hi, Richard Otter. Jada, happy weapon. Dr. Clark, what are your thoughts on Japanese creation of the Taihon? Should they have stuck with constructing small light fleet carriers, such as the Hai-Oh and Junyo? Well, here's the thing. You can only construct one ship in a slip at any one time. They honestly couldn't have built more. They couldn't have built more ships than Hai-Oh and another ship. They could have maybe got out another light fleet carrier in that time. Maybe they'd have got one half completed. But that's not going to be as helpful as having the Taiho, which is a full fleet carrier. So, in the end of it, you might as well do the Taiho, because that's the slip you've got. And make the most of the slip you've got. There's God, building tankers would require the IJ in thinking that things might not go absolutely perfect for them. And that would be very out of character for them. It would be. Which is their problem, their strategic problem. Whereas you can argue that the Royal Navy goes into a sort of different spin prior to World War II, where almost they presume everything is going to go wrong for them, so they are almost sitting there going through all the what-if scenarios and trying to prepare for everything. But also, I would like to point out the very interesting thing you have going on. You have your in between the Americans and the Japanese, and I would like to point this out in my discuss things. This is going to be a carrier battle. Everyone knows the Philippines is going to be a carrier-led battle. And so the Japanese have their higher commander on a carrier, who's having to do the strategic command, but is also having to do the tactical fleet and all sorts of other things of the carrier. And they have the second in command on a cruiser. The Americans go, hang on. We want our higher command to focus on the operation, and we want the second in command to focus on the battle. So, Spruance is in a cruiser, Mitch is on a carrier. It makes sense. It's like if you were talking about D-Day and you have got higher command sitting aboard battleships. Yes, they had the most powerful ship there. But also, have you ever tried to command an operation with those big guns going off every few minutes? Or not? Or sometimes every few seconds, every sort of couple of times a minute, and shaking and rattling everything because they're such powerful weapons? It's not going to work. The same with a carrier. This Japanese force structure, Jizaburo Ozawa is Vice Admiral in charge of the mobile fleet. He's also in charge of A-Force. And he's in charge of Carrier Division 1. He has 3 hats. Now, you could have put him in charge of A-Force and the mobile fleet. That's fine, I suppose. It's not how I would prefer to do it. That's fine. But, again, there should be another admiral in his in that carrier division to take command of that carrier division, because he's got to take. How do I put this? What is the vice admiral doing? Well, he has to take decisions on how to fight his carrier division, how to position his carriers, when to launch aircraft. All that stuff is coming to him, and his staff has to run that. And then you go, right, okay, so you're doing that. Then you have to go, what else are your staff doing? Well, they're having to run a force, so they're having to coordinate with the other with the screen and the cruisers and tell them and make sure they're coordinated for the air defense of the task force. Okay. And also, then I'm supposed to be coordinating with the van force, B force, the supply forces, the submarine forces, the other air support forces, all the various vice admirals, and telling them what to do and coordinating with them. And my staff is supposed to be running all that. It's just... I just have such sympathy for him because he's a good admiral, but there is only so much information anyone can process at a time. And they're overloading their admiral. And then you go, here's the American one. And you sit there and go, right then, so Mitcher's in charge of Task Force 58. He is. But he's in the USS Lexington. He's not in charge of Task Force 58.2. That's under Rear Admiral John W. Reeves. So he doesn't have to worry about fighting his carriers in terms of the air defense or all that. His job is to basically coordinate his task groups 58.1, 58.2, 58.4, and 58.7. And actually, principally, he's actually 58.1 through to 4, rather than 58.7. Coordinate them and make sure they launch off their strikes together. And work out that. And his commander above him, Fleet Admiral Spruance, where's he sitting? Where is Spruance sitting? Spruance is, of course, sitting aboard the Indianapolis. And where is the Indianapolis? It's also sitting in Task Group 58. So here is the joy of two. 58.2 has both Indianapolis and Lexington in. So if necessary, the two admirals in charge, the top admiral and the deputy, the one in charge of the whole operation and the one in charge of the battle, can communicate by flashing lamps without radios going off. And then you have, where is the other vice admiral? Well, it's only when you get to the third in command do you have a vice admiral, William Augustus Lee, actually in charge of a battleship division and in charge of his own carrier, in charge of his own on a battleship. But again, if you look at that particular organization, he has how many rear admirals with him? 1, 2, 3, 4. He has 4 rear admirals with him, and by golly can he delegate if he needs to various things. This is an absurd command structure. It really is. Dirt Squad, I've always thought the best approach is plan for the worst, hope for the best. Yes. David Tanner, what if Japan didn't attack Pearl Harbor but started a war in the Philippines? Attacking the American relief force instead as the Great Battle. That actually makes a lot of sense for the Japanese plan. Because then you're forcing the Americans to come to you, where your submarines can whittle them down, where you're coming into your reconnaissance aircraft, where you can spot them and whittle them down with air attacks and long-range torpedo attacks at night and then engage them. That's actually a sensible plan. I have to admit, I'm not sure the Americans would have been so dumb as to fall into it, but they might well have been forced to if you'd attacked Pearl Harbor hard enough. Old Richard, actually the IJN built whole class of high-speed naval oilers. They just lost them. They didn't build enough of them, Old Richard, and they didn't build enough of them for Pearl Harbor. They had a whole class of them, yes, but they didn't have enough of them to actually do the full Pearl Harbor which they needed to do. Grace Astley, they put a lot of planning for Pearl, including submarine refueling reconnaissance planes. And they could have planned for more tankers. They weren't stupid. They weren't stupid. At no point am I saying they're stupid. I'm saying that Pearl Harbor is a brilliant idea until you look into the reality of it. You need more tankers if you want to hang around for a long time and want to actually land some amphibious forces, which would have made it into turn Pearl Harbor into a Kantai-Kessen. Or alternatively, as I said, the other option is you do a dash and attack on Pearl Harbor. And I would have sent the main force to hit the Philippines and done a dash attack on Pearl Harbor, forcing the Americans to come charging out to cross the Pacific at me, and then I would have done the main. Then I would have been ready to hit them. But that's the Japanese make the decision they do. So nobody was really brilliant in 1942 Pacific. They had real problems with misconceptions and wrong thinking. Pretty much. Hey, King George V. Verikin, did the IJN not have vice admirals? They did have vice admirals, but the trouble is, as you can see, the mobile fleet has Vice Admiral Admiral Jisebo Ozwa, Vice Admiral Taikei Korita, and then there is also Vice Admiral Taikei Tangai. There is another Vice Admiral in charge of aircraft on some of the land on the islands. You know, they have, and it's the same Vice Admiral, it's the same people running everything. It's like Vice Admiral Kurita is in charge of the Van Force and Carrier Cruiser Division 4. And, you know, again, and there's also Vice Admiral Matomi Okaki out there, and Vice Admiral Yoshii Suzuki. So they have, I seem to remember counting this up, 2, 4, 6 Vice Admirals involved in this operation, from memory. Yeah, the Japanese have 6 Vice Admirals. All Vice Admirals running this operation. Amazowski, I think USN learned this the hard way on Terror Invasion. Command was on a battleship. All radio prepared to coordinate landing. We're out once the Bibo fired the first salvo during the bombardment. Yep. I don't know. That's right. I'm trying to think how could you could balance. I'm trying to think how you would balance conquering Southeast Asia, luring in an Allied fleet, destroying it decisively in foreign waters, on the assumption the Allies can even concentrate them. Well, that's the thing. If you presume on the American fleet come charging across, which they would do, to try and reinforce the Philippines. Surprisingly, Guadalcanal landing itself was commanded from Macaulay and modified troop transport. Why didn't they do the same on Tara? I don't know. Because they wanted them. They wanted the guns. So by that time, Lee had been promoted to lead the BBs. Too bad he never got a rematch surface engagement. And for again, to think that the IJN pride themselves on modelling themselves the Royal Navy. If in doubt, learn from the rest. Seems they went by the by. You should leave his... Furry kitten, don't be cruel to King George V. They tried their best. They tried their best. But again, if you've been talking about a Royal Navy command structure, what you'd have probably seen here in this one would be a lot of Commodores, not Vice Admirals. There'd have been a lot of Commodores, there'd have been a few Rear Admirals, a Vice Admiral, and probably an Admiral wandering around, but not much, and not as obsessively Admiral, and certainly not all this Vice Admirals. For the BRN, that would have been a case of, why are there so many 3 stars in this plot? That's great. I didn't notice one time, or would have jumped in earlier. I know. So much lol as bad as the last battle when you did a weaker when they had animals for everything except painting rafts. I think that might have been, if it was a long patrol you're watching, might well have been a long patrol about this battle. It's a fun thing. And it's the comparisons. Okay, someone just popped to my door. I'll be back in a second. But no, it's yeah, it's just not sensible. Hello, Samuel. Even Chandler, do you think it would have been advantageous to Japan to have ignored the USA at the beginning of the war in the Pacific and focus more on Asia? I mean, in the context of USA's isolationist policy. Well, they had been trying to ignore the USA for many years. Let's be honest, there is a reason you can date the World War II to the beginning of the sort of beginning part of the 1930s, if you want to, thanks to the Japanese invasion of China. You can do that if you want to. Re-Derp Squad. Guadalcanal Tower landings. Which branch or leader was in charge? Navy Admirals seem happy to have their flag on smaller ships and actions. That's a whole different debate, who was in charge in Guadalcanal and Tower. Freaking, if only the IJN had learned the lessons from the army and gone guerrilla Chindit tactics from the Chinese campaign. The economy of force problems they could have produced would have been amazing. I think they tried to an extent, but the trouble is, for that, you really need a lot more submarines. Curiosity. They use both. Kate's from the carriers and Jake's from the cruisers. Jake actually had a comparable range and speed to the Kate. That's in response to the early question of the Japanese plan of using cruiser float planes for recon was not very good. Carrier torp planes had carrier torp planes were longer range, faster and more numerous. It was designed to free up space on your carriers for strike aircraft, but you sit there and go, well, how did the Royal Navy work on that? The Royal Navy's idea was to make aircraft multi-role, and that was the same with the Americans. American dive bombers were also reconnaissance aircraft. But they use both, and they have to use both because they're trying to track down the enemy. And you need to do a lot of searching with aircraft. Because, believe it or not, the further you go away from the ship, if you're doing especially a compass search, the more aircraft you need, because the quicker the distance grows between those aircraft, so that actually whole task forces can fit through the gaps of the aircraft. I have a technical question. Why do you need any aircraft carrying radar in a battle? It's so role importance. I think some of the American aircraft might have been carrying radar, but I'm not 100% sure. There's not many mentions of it in the accounts I'm given. But I do wonder at some of the reconnaissance results if not those aircraft had radar. But I haven't yet seen it anyway. Trent was on here earlier, and he's really the radar obsessive gentleman. Radar geek. Let me free to say that. Radar geek. The Japanese did have ambitious offers at this point. They weren't all thinking post-war thoughts. Go Scott. I think at that point the radar was only being used on land-based night fighters. I know the F6F5N was introduced in late 45 for radar for night deception, and Corsair in 46. Yes, but the Royal Navy, of course, had radar equipped on Swordfish, and Avengers had radar and all sorts of things. They were putting radar pods and radar mounting on as many aircraft as they could in the Royal Navy, and I think some of them have gone on across to the Americans. RF, was the IJ command structure of these fleet actions pressure tested, review prior to schedule? No, and this is another problem for the Japanese. The Americans get to take their command structure and roll out the other task force. You know, the other fleet. They have 5th Fleet and they have 7th Fleet. And I think it's 7th Fleet, or is it 3rd Fleet? Well, I can't remember at this point. Just getting some food into my brain because I missed lunch. I noticed it was dipping down. And the Americans do roll out other command structures to take over. And then they roll them back and rest them and try and train them out and make sure they're working well together. It's a problematic battle for the Japanese. Because the Japanese command structure in many ways hasn't worked together. They've come from different ports, different places. And it was a lovely plan put together on paper by higher people and now having to be executed by people who are still alive to execute it. And I'd have said, actually, that requirement and that reality should have made them more cautious with their command structure and more clear and more concerned about putting in an admiral and making sure it was a clear and stated command structure, and that admiral in charge had a staff which could concentrate on coordinating the mission, and another admiral in charge could concentrate on running the battle, and all those things, instead of having this overload on various admirals. Amazowski. Macaulay was the flagship of Richmond K. Turner, Guadalcanal. Can't remember on the spot who commanded on Tara, but would have had to dig it out of the volume of Morrison. Humorish. They did end up using carrier planes under direct orders of the Admiral, but they maintained the doctrine. I find it hard to believe any float plane had the range of a Kate. The drag is hideous. Some did fairly well. And also, you have to remember, the floats were often a lot of work on them that was put in to try and make them minimal effective, and they would tend to not carry other things that the Kate might be carrying in comparison. Hey Turner, a weaker American commitment to relieve the Philippines would make a large defeat of make a large tactical defeat of that relief. Would make a settled peace more likely? Not really. Origin. First use of USN airborne radar was truck. I thought it was somewhere around. B. Dawson. Swordfish Mark III had microwave AS anti-surface radar for sub-hunting. Yes, it also worked on finding ships as well. I check those on. Yep. Transatlantic. On the night of the 20th of 21st of October 1944, there were two Section 22 aircraft, a PPY Ferret and a B-24, an ad hoc Ferret, that spotted a Japanese fleet Central Force approaching Leyte from Brunei Bay. The USN bobbled the communications. The PPY Ferret's immediate superior didn't believe the report and sat on it. The SB-24's report wasn't transmitted by the USN communications facility at Paleo. Fun. Purican. Radar was not the be-all and all. Just because you had radar didn't mean a PBI plot. It might just be a spike on a scope. Or in some cases, not even a scope, but tone production from the mission and reception systems. It can be fun. That's good. The earliest naval implementation of radar for recon instead of for immediate tactical targeting was March 1945 with Modified Avengers. The order for development was February 1944. USN implementation of radar. Yes, I was going to say that. I'm fairly sure the Royal Navy had been using radar for various naughty things, trying to do. The radar hadn't been necessarily developed on that. The anti-submarine radar was certainly not developed for that. But yeah, the British weren't averse to using it and trying to use it, especially at night. Look, I know, you know, but there's lots of talk about various flying boats coming out here and aircraft, so, you know, just remember, there are the special emojis. If you want to discuss them. Including the Catalina one. That's good. I should also add USN carrier aircraft. The land-based aircraft were using it before then, I think, but too heavy for carrier aircraft. Used in B-24 patrols act. Furican, using radar to penetrate the cloak of darkness. What ungentlemanly conduct is Perfidious Albion up to now? I know. This is the joy always about history. The amount of times Britain gets called, oh, they're gentlemanly. They don't do this, they don't do that. And then you go, and who did that first? It was the British. Really are great at that con job. Seaman, okay, right about the Jake, but early in the war they were using the FM-1 Pete, which was a biplane. Yes. What's wrong with using a biplane? You want something to carry a lot of stuff with a lot of fuel and go a long way, or on minimum to get the most efficient use of the fuel for a long range? Biplane's a fairly good idea to go for. Well, I think the only one at the moment who's on who can use the captions other than me is old Richard. So, you know, if he wants to start punctuating them, he can. You know, and using those special emojis. the American force structure is in many ways a tour de force of how to set these things up, and this is something you cannot sing high enough praise for. As you can see, you have each group is organised around 2 fleet carriers and 2 light carriers. Barring Task Force 58.4, which is 1 fleet carrier and 2 light carriers. They're down a fleet carrier. There is a standardization. There are heavy cruisers and light cruisers or anti-aircraft cruisers with them. You know, the Cruiser Division 10, 3 heavy cruisers and 2 anti-aircraft light cruisers. You have... One of the interesting things about Cruiser Division 12 is it has, technically, 4 light cruisers in it. And there is a heavy cruiser wandering around, but here is the specific orders for that heavy cruiser. Indianapolis, if the Japanese attack, you are to keep Spruance as far away from the fighting as physically possible. And 58.4 also has 4 light cruisers, basically. An anti-aircraft 103 and regular light cruisers. So 58.1 is the one which has the heavy cruiser division. It has Baltimore, Boston, and Canberra. And that's USS Canberra, not HMS Canberra, I think. Yeah. Baltimore class cruiser. Originally named Pittsburgh, but changed to Canberra to honor the HMAS Canberra after she's lost in battle. Okay, right about that. Slow, reduced range. If everything depends on cycling and fleet, then you need the best out there. Yeah, but what's your definition of the best? Again, for reconnaissance, fast helps if you know where you're going. But if you're going out searching, then you don't tend to fly fast. Because you want to search the area. If you fly too fast, you might miss them. Especially if you're flying through cloud, or you fly low, that uses up more fuel, or fly high. You know, reconnaissance is not a zero-sum game. Oh, Richard, fun fact, Boston and Canberra were the first US guided missile cruisers. Is there anything scarier than a guided kangaroo? Wouldn't you name it? Wouldn't you pick Canberra for that role? Very so wasting a heavy cruiser effectively. I can see it running as a C3 cruiser. Well, what's its other role? If you get into a surface engagement, do you want to lose that heavy cruiser? Do you want to lose Spruance? No. And trust me, Lexington has the same orders if there's a surface engagement. You're going to be having the carriers running out there, so the cruiser running away isn't really running with them. It's escorting the carriers away from the fight. So, paper analysis. The Japanese were were going for their decisive battle. They were outnumbered 5-3 in carriers. The whole idea for the Kantai-Kaisen had been that you were supposed to whittle down the Americans, so you were facing them on parity, if not superiority. This doesn't look like parity, and it's certainly not superiority. They were outnumbered 7-5 in battleships. Oh, poor Lee, if he'd had that fight. They have a superiority of 3 heavy cruisers. And I will make the same statement I said before. If you would like to petition World of Warships, because you would like to take this on latest, I will let you have any 3 tier 10 heavy cruisers you like. And I will limit myself to tier 5. I'll be even nicer than that. Tier 5. Light cruisers and destroyers. And it'll give me 11 light cruisers and 37 destroyers. And I will gladly see who wins that fight. Your 3 heavy cruisers or my 11 light cruisers and 37 destroyers. I have a feeling you will end up dying in a fury of torpedoes. But we can see it could be an interesting thing. 48. So 16-1. Numerical superiority. They were outnumbered, and that's a joking one, of course. In reality, what does this mean? Well, this means, yes, the Americans have more stuff to escort, but they have a lot more escorts to do it. Because 3 heavy cruisers can only be in 3 places at once. That's 48 more escorts the Americans have for their carriers and their battleships to provide them with a layer of air defense protection. So not only do they have more carriers in the first place, they have more stuff to protect those carriers, which makes them more survivable. They outnumber the Japanese in submarines. And that's going to prove really decisive, because American submarines are going to get some very interesting kills in this operation. And here is the real kicker. The Americans are bringing 900 carrier aircraft to the battle, with a good mixture of veterans and new pilots integrated into the same units. The Japanese are bringing 450 carrier pilots and 400 carrier aircraft and 350 land-based aircraft. So the land-based aircraft are commanded by another vice admiral for starters, who doesn't bother telling Oswa what's going on. Oswa what's going on when he loses all his aircraft. They have so that's a divided command structure. They don't have veteran pilots. And let's be honest, they have 100 less aircraft than the Americans. That's good. American aircraft need to be able to fly fast as sun, but they also need to fly slow with good loiter time. Also, incidentally, good qualities for drug running aircraft. Probably. Second here, SR-70 would beg to differ. SR-71 isn't really what I would call a fleet reconnaissance aircraft in the 1930s. The SR-71, basically, what you're looking for in a fleet reconnaissance aircraft is a mixture between a finding aircraft and basically what we would now use geosynchronous satellites for, etc., to monitor an area, an AWACS. So it's a different thing. The SR-71 was a go photograph this thing. We already think that something exists there, but we want better, more detailed photographs for it. Or we want you to test all these defences and take lots of photos of this area. Not we want you in real time to orbit around this point and keep track of this fleet. It's a different thing when we're talking about reconnaissance aircraft. So it's, as usual, the phraseology changes. Furikin, parity, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. I don't think it means what the Japanese think it means. The Japanese keep thinking their quality of their ships is going to make up for their lack of numbers. I'm not sure they're that anywhere near superior, and I definitely don't think it makes up for those numbers. Oh, Richard, the old Room 7 Talos loved to reach out and touch someone. They did. Da, 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 da. Very Chelsea. Jakes were the ones used prior to Pearl, Coral, and Seawave. The cruisers had catapult launchers. Swells were more of an issue for recovery, but there are ways around that. That were. Discord. The USN ethos on cruisers seems to be, if you want to lead a division with a heavy cruiser, it probably deserves a battleship. Probably. I think just saw a photo of IJN heavy cruiser from 1943 showing the biplane. Probably a slow rollout. Yes. Galgasman, Re-11 US light cruisers are 10 plus 1,000 tons turret farm 6-inch cruisers. That inferior to Mirko? Not really, even in a 101-1. Well, yeah, but, you know, I'm saying if you would like to, you're more than welcome to. I put it out there. Hello, Cow Two Face, how you doing? Sonic wait, the Japanese only had 3. They have 3 more heavy cruisers than the Americans. But their superiority, basically, the way that's written is basically the 3 heavy cruisers are where they're superior, and then they've got 11 less light cruisers and 37 less destroyers. So I was going to sort of put they outnumber the they have 3 more cruisers as one thing, and then 11 less light cruisers and 37 less destroyers. But I thought I'd put it that way because I thought it was more cool, and I thought it would stick in people's minds more. Senator Scott, the USN adapted the RN fighter control system themselves. What was the IJN aircraft control system like? Similar to the RN? No. It really wasn't that great. Furry Kitten. Princess Bride reference? Lost in Trans... What's Princess Bride? It's... The IJN aircraft control and coordination system is just getting started in some respects. They don't really have the radars in service yet. They have them in development, but they don't really have the radar capability in service. And they don't have the voice communications really at the level at which they need to be. They have some doctrine, and they have fighters supposed to be in position, and they do have ways of coordinating, controlling them on paper, but those systems often break down because they have inexperienced fighters, pilots and inexperienced controllers. So you're definitely nowhere near the RN. And honestly, even the USN at this point gets, even later in the campaign, you know, Okinawa, etc., when you have the Royal Navy doing fighter control in the Pacific alongside their American counterparts, the Americans are going, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And the British are going, well, if you've managed to survive the Mediterranean, yes, they come at you in bigger waves. In theory, in practice, we tend to see them coming because they start doing the orbiting thing, and we know when they're going to come. Which makes our lives a little bit easier. In the Mediterranean, they would just literally pop up from their airbase and be on us in a few minutes. Bloomin' annoying, that was. No, Scott. US Drug Enforcement Agency has invested in business jets basically equipped for AWACS. On the subject of AWACS and recon planes, how long do you think until AWACS have slaved parasite drones for optical verification and radar signatures? Honestly, to an extent, you can do that now if you look what's been going on in some parts of the world and some operations, but the thing is, it's actually putting it into place and actually developing it. RAF. Inconceivable. I don't think that word means what you think it means. Discord. Is the IJN fighter control essentially left to the pilots in the air or to organise amongst themselves? In practice, it becomes that. Gross asking, how much of RN fighter control was influenced by RAF fighter control during the Battle of Britain? They must have learned a lot. You would think so, but not really, because, and this comes back to some, there is a very different thing in the scenario. The RAF fighter control is based off sector control, and they have a sector, and they're coordinating that. And it does work out that way, but in terms of enemy, we detect them at a long range, coming in, then we deal them. But the RAF, it tends to be interceptor based. We launch fighters to engage. The Royal Navy develops, partially because they have to, but also because it works better for fleet air engagements. Because usually by the time, because of the way your distance is, your target isn't London, which is back there a long way behind the radars. Your radar is on top of your target, your aircraft carrier. The Royal Navy develops a pole of standing, flying caps and all those sort of things, so that they're already airborne. That's what they prefer, to have them airborne and controlling them that way. So there are some things shared across, but it becomes a very different sort of style and policy, because the RAF aren't maintaining a cap, they're maintaining alert fighters, which they can surge up a lot, because that's what they have. That's why you have the Hurricane and the Spitfire as they are. They're designed to be rapidly launched aircraft. That's why they're the shape they are, that's what their speed are. The Royal Navy, especially because of the way the Royal Navy have been focusing its carriers on generating continuous operation of aircraft and continuous strikes, it's far better at maintaining a cap, and that suits the scenario where your radar has the same range maybe as the chain home radars, but instead of the target being behind the chain home radars, the target is the chain home radar, sort of the station on top of the carrier. You don't have as much time or as much distance to be able to launch, so you maintain them. It's similar but different. Steam Winch. An AWACS from the 80s could not pick up Cessna's flying treetop. I have talked to people who did it and never got caught in the sky. No Princess Bride reference? Inconceivable. There's a shortage of... I'm not getting into that one. I have little cousins watching this, seriously. They're going to be nagging me to watch this movie at this point. Nutty Hyper One. US also has UK and Canada helping them. Fun fact: Canadian ace who flew a Scorsa was shut down playing by Farmer Family and restored and in on display now. Cool. Because that's before his time, The Princess Bride. I don't know, probably my sister's time then. Seamush, in the 80s, they were using US military bases to land. That's fun and worrying. Trent Lang, around this. The US only learned about fighter control because of US Robin. No, USN had its own system based on what was learned from fighter controllers sent to UK in 1940 to 41. It was. But it was learnt based on, actually, on the RAF system. When they got the USS Robin, they decided, hang on, the Navy has a slightly different system to the Air Force here. And, it works better for navies. So they did nick a great deal more from the US Robin, as Trent goes on to. Hurricane, UK sector responsive control under the Downing system was vastly different, which is why a bomber stream worked well-ish against German defensive plan systems. Hi, Kilo. 19. Hey, just flying. Gross houses. So proactive RN versus reactive RF. It fits their scenario. Let's be honest. If the RAF are maintaining, compared to the bomber forces that come in, if the RAF were maintaining enough fighters in the air constantly to do that would put a massive strain on their engines, on their maintenance, and on their fuel supplies. It would be tremendous. Whereas for the Navy, and you can't really justify it because you can rapidly launch and you do have the time for the RF. The Navy don't have the luxury of that time. They don't have that advantage. They have a different scenario, so they have to react in a different way. That's good. The RAF was proactive in a way. They were positioned squadrons to intercept the bombs from up. Well, that's because the aircraft would rapidly launch. They would gain height. and then they could attack from above. But the thing is, they had the time, because the radar was, well, let's say, radar's here, level with this point, okay, on me. And they would detect the aircraft about here. The fighters would launch from about here. So these aircraft would be detected coming in, These would launch up, and then, as they're coming in, probably about here, that's the engagement point. And the fighters would literally do almost a parabolic arch. Straight in, and go up and down. Which is fine. But, if you're a Navy ship, radar carrier here, bombers detected same distance, what do I have to, if I try and launch from here, I'm going to be engaging them here. I'm never going to get a chance to really stop them or break them up. So I'm going to go straight into them. So I have to be airborne in about this sort of area. So when you're coming in here, hello, there you are, boom. It's a different policy because of a different. It's both are in their way proactive and both are proactive and reactive, but the Navy's one is based on radar target here. RAF's one is based on radar here, fighters here, target here. It works. It's a different system based on different criteria. It's not, neither's bad and neither's better or worse than the other. They're based on different criteria and they have to work that way. That's good. Yes, as the doctor is saying, the RF had an extra 50 or 60 miles between detection and the enemy being over the target. With World War II flight speeds, that's about 15 to 20 minutes. Which is enough time. Yes, Last Canadian VC, Robert Hampton Gray, is an interesting read. I'd agree on that one. The Commodores, Navy versus Air Force defense. And also, London never could have dreamed about the flak density as the warships. No, they couldn't have. So there's swings and roundabouts. Brilliant. Plus, by the time you have a couple of Matalots accelerating a Firefly or a Swordfish to take off speed, they need a brewer. Yeah. To be fair, usually a Swordfish didn't need much Matalot work. Swordfish would take off in a stiff breeze if you weren't careful. You had to be careful to tie those things down, or at least make sure they had enough weight on them. So as we can see, here is the real thing. The Japanese launch, the Japanese have their forces coming from two different areas in the Philippines. Because of harbour size, fuel size, and protect them from the American attack. They end up withdrawing in the direction of Okinawa after the battle. It's a... Again, the whole scenario is you don't have a command structure which is used to working together. You have a command structure which is executing a plan most of them were not involved in the planning of. And you have them coming from different areas and having to coordinate over vast distances. The fact that the Japanese accomplished what they did was very, very good, but the planning for it being a decisive battle is... David Tanner. An airbase on the same alert level as a carrier can launch more aircraft and faster than a carrier. No turning into wind, no bringing more aircraft to deck. On the same alert level is an interesting point, David. On the same alert level. And it depends on what your aircraft type you're talking about, what you're working on, and all sorts of other things. Because the Navy carriers do a very, very good job of trying to launch aircraft. And if you're saying alert level, as in fighters ready to go, well, the Navy aircraft tend to have deck parking as well, which means they're rolled out, put on the catapult, gone, boom. Next one's on the catapult, gone, boom. Next one's on the catapult, gone, boom. Next one's on the catapult. So situational wise, they can, you know, and as Dirk Scotts point out, usually more than one runway, wider runways. There's all sorts of different factors which can affect it. So does Tojo resign when exactly? When exactly? I don't think he's removed till July 1944, so after this. This is June 1944, so yeah, it's after this battle. He's at that point. He is, well, he resigns as Chief of the Imperial General Staff on the 18th of July 1944. Minister of War and Prime Minister on the 22nd of July 1944. And what's interesting is in all three posts he's succeeded by someone different. He gets Yoshijiro Uzumezu as the Chief of Staff, the Chief of the Imperial Japanese Staff. Hajime Tsugume, Japanese Field Marshal, becomes the Minister of War. And Kunaki Kuroso, a Japanese general and Governor General Korea and Prime Minister of Japan from 1944 to 45. What's interesting is he's then succeeded by an admiral of the IJN. And then there's 54 days of Prince Naoki Hiroshi, who's a general. And then Baron Kyujuro Shidara, who is basically is Prime Minister 45 to 46. There are some fun people in this point. Not everyone. I seen a TV special on Robert Gray just before they fully restored the plane. I knew a single clip wingtips. Year after TV special, they found them. Furry again. A lot of carriers aren't 5,000 feet long. No, they're not. It's terrible. Could be fun if some of them were. Maneuvering them around the world's oceans would be interesting. Tojo isn't deposed and killed. He loses his post. I think he does end up going to the War Crimes Tribunal. But yeah, he's executed in the end, but he's executed. He as the American soldiers surrounded his house on September 11th, 1945, he shot himself in the chest with a pistol, but missed his heart. At this point, basically, they send medical personnel to help with the arrest of all the other Japanese war criminals. After recovering from his injuries, he's moved to prison. Tried by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East for war crimes. Found guilty. And is executed by hanging on December 23rd, 1948. Jevena. Since American submarines sank two of the largest Japanese fleet carriers taking part in the battle, were US subs a decisive part of the battle? No carriers to put new aircraft on? They certainly have a decisive long-term impact, but no. I would say the decisive part of the battle is probably the airstrikes which wipe out the land-based aircraft. They really they wipe out the Japanese before they even begin, so the land-based air suddenly becomes no factor. It gets wiped out at the beginning of the battle. And without land-based air, the Japanese are forced to do a sort of retreat, and by that point the submarines then hit, and that becomes the long-term consequence of the battle. Now, Scott, you didn't point out land-based fighters usually take off from a flattish field if they need to. Battle airfields were usually easy to repair in part because of this. Yep. No turning into wind. On the other hand, even on airfield, it is a luxury to be able to scramble into the wind and not getting wind into your runway side. It is. Furrican, US subs, even with the absolute terrible and then amazing Mark 14s, were absolutely amazing in the Pacific Theatre. We need target, we have sunk them all. That was a bit of a problem. That was basically they learnt the same. They had the same problem as the British did at certain points with the German Navy, because the Royal Navy submarines were going, we are watching Germany's harbours, and they are not moving anything out of their harbours. So land-based fighter aircraft aren't always fun and glory. No. Keferican, British fighters should be able to land on a cricket pitch. Don't try and do that with Eurofighter. An F-35B might just about do it, but I don't think it'll take off from it again. Probably sink into the ground. Similar. Lol, ever see the wartime films from both New Guinea and Aleutians? The US Air Force tried to take off in 2 foot of water. Looks horrible. It was certainly fun. Enjoy, furry kitten. There are videos of Shumei Okawa hitting Toshio on the back of the head during the trial. Of course, it's the historian being tried that gets off being insane. Oh. Asakar, temporary airfields hacked out of the jungle were pretty horrendous. Oh, they were. But no, as I got into when I was talking about this battle, honestly, let's put it this way. The Japanese Guam had sort of began launching their Guam-based aircraft for an attack. These are the ones which are under another vice admiral, who's technically sort of supporting Oswa, but isn't supporting Oswa. I'm probably pronouncing his name right. Let me just check it. Oswa, yeah, Oswa, and they're spotted coming off. And so 30 Hellcats go off from Bellewood and they sit over the airfields while the Japanese aircraft are launching from Orite Field. And other aircraft are seen launching from the other islands. And pretty much a battle breaks out in which, well, they just keep getting taken out. Guam, the Japanese lose 35 aircraft for the loss of a single Hellcat. At 9:57, large numbers of enemy fighters are seen approaching the fleet, and they call the fighters back from Guam. So the Hellcats come back from Guam to rearm. The point is, the Japanese lose their land-based aircraft before they can get involved. Guam, etc., and other islands, they're just not there to help them. They're not available to help for them. There's a statistic I have somewhere. Okay. So in action alone, the Japanese, in terms of their air units, will lose, out of the 222 fighters, 113 dive bombers, and 95 torpedo bombers of their carrier force, will lose 243 aircraft. And that's their carrier forces. It's just, they just lose so much. And a land force are even more damaging. You spelled corral wrong before the beginning. Sorry, I had to. Okay. That's great. Lots of really tight airfields built for the New Guinea campaign. Especially when an overloaded Liberator stacks straight into awaiting infantry. This one, there's a story of an RAF pilot who asked for 5 gallons of petrol to drive home to see his wife. Was refused. Flew in his Spitfire instead, landing on the road, using 48 gallons instead. I don't think anyone would have actually said no to him visiting his wife. I've heard that story before, but I've never found anyone who would be able to give me a name to match it up, or an incident report. Ah, Bramblebank. Fun place. Now, of course, the battle which might have happened was at one point Spruance and Mitscher talk to Lee and go, "Do you go and engage the battleships? Have a battle fight." And Lee goes, "No, I do not want to have a night fight against the Japanese because my battleships aren't trained up for this sort of thing, and it will be dangerous." And let's be honest again, whilst yes, the Americans have a 5-7 advantage in battleships. Their battleships are 2 North Carolinas, North Carolina and Washington, 2 Iowas, Iowa and New Jersey, and 3 South Dakotas, Indiana, South Dakota, Alabama. So good ships, but do you want to take them in a night fight in which they might end up accidentally hitting each other against Yamato, Musashi, Kongo, Haruna, do you really want to? I'm sure there's another battleship wandering around here. So there's another old battleship. There's... and Nagato. Admittedly, Nagata is off with Carrier Division 2 under Rear Admiral Yoshima in B Force, so Nagato might not come involved in it. So you can say, right then, it would just be with the battleships as part of the van. It would just be Yamato, Musashi, Kongo, and Haruna. That's almost 2-to-1 numbers. But that's still 2 18-inch armed battleships. That's a lot of firepower. And night actions are not easy things. Assuming the Japanese aircraft are able to successfully ambush American planes' current attack bases, could the Japanese have turned around the air war during this battle? No, because, well, they could have turned around the fight in this battle. If their land-based aircraft had managed to actually score a decisive punch against the carriers and taken some American carriers out, they could have changed the battle, but it wouldn't have changed the war. Furiken, did the IJN actually train people to land on the carriers, or did they train them on land and then give them a pat on the back? Congratulations, you're a pilot the Emperor expects. They did a bit of training on carriers. But it wasn't as much as you would probably hope. Great Dominion, there were still some night torpedo attacks by Rico units against the American fleet, I believe. Not very effective. No, they were very limited in their abilities to do stuff. Oh! There's a fox in my garden. A big one. Hello. Sorry. Furiken, 7 USBBs against what is a mix of battle cruisers and battleships. I would say the Congo's post-refit are fitting more in the fast battleship spectrum, or at least the battle end of the battle cruiser spectrum. JV, was the battleship advantage really worth anything in this situation? At this point, they aren't they primarily anti-aircraft escorts? Well, the thing is, the Americans certainly have the battleships clunked together as a force to do the fighting. And the Japanese have them as a mixture of escorting and as a heavy force to come and do the fighting. So, yeah, they are worth something, because battleships are still very dangerous things. You wouldn't want a battleship getting amongst your own, an enemy battleship getting amongst your own carriers. It would not be pretty. I know in World of Warships they have these beautiful things, and you're spending ages firing high explosive or firing armor piercing at a carrier and such things. In reality, and I hate to say this also goes for destroyers, if a destroyer or a carrier isn't an armored carrier and is hit by a 15-inch high explosive round, there isn't going to be much left of them left after the first hit, let alone a salvo of them hitting. With even if it's armor-piercing shots, the amount of times I see armor-piercing, you deflected off that destroyer's hull, and you're going, it wouldn't have. That would have dinged the hull heavily. But as George Crabbe says, why often in one battle they might win. It's great to mean. Weren't most American battleship and cruiser groups well worked up in Night Attack through sort of time of the battle, Empress Augusta Bay, which was the big night service action? They were getting there, but Ching Li didn't feel that Admiral Lee didn't feel that his battleships group was worked up enough that he wanted to risk them in a night action. And then, of course, the 20th of June is just not a nice experience for anyone. At this point, it's when the Japanese realise, oh, we're fricked. And the Japanese lose tankers as well as fighters, and that's really the big loss. I would say losing the fighters losing the carriers is a loss, but you've already lost all the pilots and aircraft you had from a lot of them as well, so they wouldn't be much more help. But you lose the Seomaru, the Genyamaru, and you have other tankers damaged. You lose your ability to supply your forces. You lose your ability to move. And that's, again, when you go sort of to the American task group. Which is their supply group? 58.7. Let me find my notes. He says. And the thing is, the American supply group never has to get anywhere near the battle line. It never has to be anywhere near it. It was Third Fleet, the other option was. It's either Third Fleet or Fifth Fleet. And that's the major advantage, again, for the Americans. Their supply fleets are kept safe. Gentlinker, in the summer of 1944, USN Fast Battle Line hadn't trained together at night, nor had they had main battery gunnery with ship targets for months. Lee was right about the risk of night action. Yep. Old Richard's right though. Again, it's Lee's hesitation was due to unit cohesion working over, not night gunnery per se. Night gunnery when you're look. There is. Oh yes, we can fire our guns at night. Oh yes, we can fire our guns tonight working as a team of ships is a different thing. Okay? One ship fighting at night, that depends on the individual ship's capabilities. But if you've got lots of ships working together firing at night, you don't want them to get and think, oh, that ship firing off there must be our enemy, fire at them. And when you have the ships firing at each other. Especially when you outnumber your opponent. Hello, Frank Spasato. And hello, Right Sublet. Lee knew what he's doing to hesitate in night action. Yes, he did. But a group of battleships in shallow water getting surprised by a bunch of torpedoes from Japanese destroyers at night could go horribly wrong. Yes, it could. Frank Furrican. I'll do something on logistics at some point. On the Fleet Auxiliary. Dove Scott, Spitfire story. Never happened, sir. I'll have you know that I took that story from the most acclaimed historical academics. Horrible Histories. Yes, and I am going to be reviewing a Horrible Histories book in one of the books, one of the videos coming up. But I still would be taking it a bit of with a pinch of salt. Actually, despite how cool it would have been for us to have a BB battle to study, imagine how many casualties there could have been in one. Yes. Given this sort of their battleships, the Japanese seem to not have been planning for a surface action at all, unlike the USN. Yes and no, but 4 of them are concentrated in the van. So they have 4 of them together in the van. They're 2 biggest and 2 heaviest and the 2 fastest of their battle cruiser. Or modified battle cruisers, battle cruisers. We're going to call them anything. They're a BBC battle cruiser. As to Crow, didn't the USN have advantages at night thanks to fire control radar? Trouble is, not every ship had the same type of radar with the same capabilities. And until mid-1944, they didn't have much, well, they'd only just got Doppler rangefinder coming in, and it wasn't really fully integrated yet. Great Dominion. What was the state of IFF technology in American warships at this point? Not brilliant. Furrican, I can imagine that under night conditions, without corroborating data, the radar-dependent CIC would get more confused than in a purely visual unit. That's the other option. John Shea, you buy a pinch, do you mean a Yamato tonnage amount of salt? Potentially. Dave Scott, in serious and regarding sorry, I imagine there were times when a pilot took fuel to go home when refused, just not in a Spitfire. Probably wouldn't be written up in. Honestly, possibly wouldn't even notice in most cases. Because, let's be honest, how's he going to get the fuel? He'll probably go to someone who's fueling the aircraft, and they'll fueling the aircraft, and they'll just put a can in his car. You know, the fitters know their officers and look after them, and they'll go right then. And it's all done on a wink scenario. Or alternatively, pilots who don't have cars would give their fuel rations from their ration book to their friends who do have cars so they could get fuel for their cars. There were ways around it. I love the way Admiral Cunningham and Admiral Jellicoe both had the same habit of giving officers and NCOs. They had to do trips to places. I think Cunningham had a chief petty officer fly home with a secure brief for his and so he got home for his anniversary after he'd been doing all sorts of things during the war. Dropped the brief off in the Ministry of Defence. Went saw his wife. I think she was staying at that point in Sussex. Had to go back a week later to the Ministry of Defence, pick up the response, and took it back to Cunningham as the story as I was related to it. And what part of the response to Cunningham was, why did you send this message out by this request out by such a strange method, rather than by just normal telegram or those things? And Cunningham's response came through on telegram, I think, and he said, a question of security and personnel. But I have to admit, I've never found that telegram. I have never been able to verify that story in more than hearsay terms. I've heard it from someone who heard it from their father. And I've heard it from another person who also heard it from their father. But it's not something I've actually been able to verify myself as actually happening. Kangason, Re-Night action. Also by this point, the IJN demonstrated that they are more than adept in night service actions. And whilst their fighter crews have gone down and their aircraft pilots have died, they haven't lost a lot of their surface battleship crews from the pre-war days, and they know what they're doing. Right, Sublet. Hello, Dr. Clark. I was a USN gunner's mate during the 1980s, and I have extensive library of photography I shot during both my time and active duty years later. I lived 2 hours from BB-60, BB-61, and BB-55. Cool. Hello, Constrazis. Right, I'm going to say this is going to end at about 9:30, mainly because I have a feeling I'm either going to need to order my tea and get it delivered, because I haven't eaten anything today, or I'm going to cook it. Ooh, hit me up if you ever need something to arcane I can track you down for. Please do. Please contact me on Discord, so I have a thing I can contact you back on. I'm happy to. That's good. I imagine it happened in a lot of units. Having personnel fight constantly until they break ends up with a lot of dead personnel. Yes, and as we all know, the one thing the British do seem to have been very good at in World War II, when they had the opportunity, they tried to husband their personnel resources, well, managed them very, very well. The one example which I tend to give as being a bad one is Somerville. Frank, there's another 10 minutes. I'm sure you can come up with some questions in that time, and I can answer them. Summary of the US losses. 1 battleship damaged, 123 aircraft destroyed, 109 dead. Japan's losses. 3 fleet carriers sunk, 2 oilers sunk. And remember, we are starting out with roughly 800 aircraft, land and sea based, to 900 American aircraft. The Americans have lost 123 aircraft. The Japanese have lost between 550 and 645 aircraft, depending on how you account for it. So basically, they've lost between 60 and 80%, well, 65 and 80% of their aircraft. The Americans have lost About 15-20%. Japanese got documentation on Allied IFF on downed Allied bombers over a ball in 1943 and elsewhere from then on. That doesn't surprise me. Torturing Allied aircrew to discuss about it. They have 6 other ships damaged, and they lose nearly 3,000 dead. 3,000. Let's be honest, the Battle of the Philippine Sea is a decisive battle, but it's a decisive battle for the Americans. Distinguished, did the US ever figure it out during the war that the Japanese could spoof their IFF? Not really, but the Japanese didn't manage to spoof it a lot. The Japanese could, but by the time it was a big factor, especially Okinawa, etc., there weren't really enough experienced Japanese pilots to implement it. And Great Dominion. The Japanese also often employed aircraft to drop parachute flares to illuminate the battlefield night. Yes, same as the British did. Remember, at Taranto, there is two of the swordfish are employed as flare droppers. And the reason they're dropping flares is to illuminate the targets for the other swordfish. And also because the bright lights suddenly showing up at night tend to blind the gunners. It's a win-win-win scenario. Richard Order, in your opinion, what was the worst investment into tech development that Japan wasted money on? Japan didn't really waste their money, they just didn't have enough at the beginning. And I think there is part of me which sits there with Yamato and Masashi and goes, well, I understand your logic, but would it have been better to use those resources for other things? And it's like, if I'm going to cheat the treaties anyway, I'm going to build decent destroyers, and I'm going to build destroyer escorts in peacetime. Anti-submarine sloops. I don't think I think the Japanese should have... Basically, they spend a lot of their tech money developing very, very fast long-range aircraft and other long-range weapons, which makes sense. And then they set up for for how to fight a war, and then they do operations which stop them not being able to fight a war. As I said, Pearl Harbor is a classic example. They both achieved too little for it to be a decisive battle, and too much for them to get the decisive battle in a time period at which they could actually win it. Furry Kitten, did the Japanese also realise the US codebreakers were reading all those signals? Did the US realise the Japanese were reading their signals? At a certain point, both sides functioned in, but the Japanese are kind of like the Germans. They believe in coincidences for too long. Steve Winnish, they built an incredible number of planes in the last year of war, but it didn't help when the experienced pilots were all dead. Agreed. Let's go with tech that made it into the war. They did put a lot of tech into the war, and it was a lot of interesting stuff. But the fact is, the big problem for the Japanese wasn't the tech development and wasn't the technology developing. It was actually turning the tech from vaporware into hardware, and turning into hardware with experienced personnel that can actually use it. So honestly, you're asking, I'm not going to say technology, but I'd say the biggest waste of money is the training of the aircrew in the 1920s and 1930s of the Fleet Air Arm, and turning the Fleet Air Arm into the instrument they created, because they don't do anything to preserve it. They don't do anything to function in to keep that experience and keep that going, and keep that Fleet Air Arm as sharp as they can. Because when you're winning battles, and let's be honest, they lose Midway, but they do okay at Coral Sea, and they're winning at Pearl Harbor. Although, as I've said, it's not really that much help. And before that, you should be siphoning off those experienced officers. A, to create rooms for people to be promoted within those units, those experienced units. But B, to give you veterans coming back to new units you're raising, to be integrated in them, and also giving you veterans to come back to do training of the people going through. So you can retain the institutional memory and the thought that goes into it. But the Japanese don't do that. So I'd say it's not so much a waste of technology they have, but a waste of people. They're a very wasteful force when it comes to their actual human capital. Ben Grogan, I think most naval rocket attack planes, I think most of the rockets were tended to be high explosive, but I do think they had. I don't think they had many armor-piercing ones for the Navy when they were using anti-ship rockets for anti-ship missions. Because usually rockets were mounted when they were going at smaller ships, which are sort of torpedo boats and that sort of thing. In which case you'd use, or occasionally the British used them on light merchant ships, high explosive. Ferrigan, I have a nice patrol torch. It is a 50-watt LED. So the only one only use outside of blinding people is it potentially signals naval units 20 miles offshore. That was fun. So I think most of the planes they built in 45 were army models, good enough for kamikaze. The army models weren't too bad either in 1945. They're good aircraft. But as Ferry Kirin points out, planes can be replaced quickly, crews take years. Gossaros, the biggest waste of resources for going to war with the top 2 fleets in the world simultaneously. Even if they were distracted by it in the Atlantic. Yeah, that's the interesting thing. So the question is, what would have happened if the Japanese hadn't attacked Britain? If they hadn't attacked the British Empire or invaded anywhere in Malaya, etc., they had just concentrated on attacking America. Would Britain have still been able to justify declaring war? Would the Americans have still been supplying Britain to fight the war in Europe if they'd been fighting a war in the Pacific, but not Hitler hadn't declared? Comes a very interesting what if. If the Japanese don't attack the British, and the Germans don't declare war on the Americans, the Japanese did have a radar program running through World War II. And they had lots of work going on it, but the radar is used for different things. One of the interesting examples is they use radars to watch for Allied bombers dropping mines, so they can go and clear out the mines to keep their harbours open. As the Crow, the kamikazes kind of made sense, had a higher hit rate than regular bombing runs for similar casualties. Alfred B228, what's the time to train a new pilot during World War II? They can be trained in a few months, but you need to have the right people to train them. And you need to have a veteran experience in all things. If you consider the Americans and the British are doing sort of what we might call almost trickle crewing into their units, in that the units will have experienced personnel and then the junior personnel will join at lowest rank and sort of learn their way up. But at various points, the senior personnel get extracted from the squadron to either go and form the core of new squadrons, or go and back and train more pilots. So the pilots you've got coming in are continuing. it being instructed by people who have relevant experience, and then maybe the instructors who have been instructing will go back as a squadron commander or something more senior in terms of the squadrons that are being formed up. So you have a cycle of personnel with experience coming back to train people, and then experienced people going back to the front line to lead them. So you always have experienced people involved in the operations. So, what might have been? This is the question when you're talking about the Kantai-Kessen, when you're talking about this sort of operations. The big question about what it might have been is, what if the Japanese had managed a decisive battle? How could they have managed a decisive battle? Well, as I said, you either have to turn Pearl Harbor into a decisive battle, or if you are going to try and turn the Philippine Seas into a decisive battle, you have to find some way of bringing even more force to bear and making sure your land-based aircraft stay involved. But primarily, you have to go back to the beginning of the war. Waddle 92. Read the rockets for anti-shipping. They use 25-pound solid anti-armor piercing warheads in Coastal Command. Thank you. I presume they were using the HE ones, but okay. As said before. Thank you. Trent Lenko. The Japanese invented their own microwave cavity magnetron radar. The USA got theirs from the UK. The Germans got theirs captured from RAF Bomber Command. Walt 62, Walt 92. The 60-pound high explosive warheads were mostly used in 2nd Tactical Air Force on mainland Europe. Yeah, but I think also the Fleet Air Arm used them occasionally. I think see, that's what I was thinking of when the Fleet Air Arm operations. We were talking about rocket attack of ships, and I was thinking about the Fleet Air Arm. And I think they used the HE warheads, but they might have used the AP ones. So what might have been? Well, how do you turn Pearl Harbor into a decisive battle? As I said, the only options are to take out a lot more. A, you have to launch those extra waves and take out an aircraft, at least one of the American aircraft carriers. B, probably land troops. I know it's going to be difficult. I know you're going to be dealing with defences, etc., and troops there, but you're not landing there to take the island. You're landing them in there in the outrage and the confusion of the air attacks. You're going to land probably 2 divisions of experienced troops and go through and destroy facilities. Basically, the order is to destroy everything in sight. But I think the US Navy still comes back, because I think actually the fundamental flaw of the Kantai-Kessen idea, the whole thing, is it's a misunderstanding of the American and British way of war. The Americans and Brits do not go away. I'm not sure what it is, but they don't. In fact, I can't think of many nations which do in history. You defeat them. It worked with Russia at the Battle of Tsushima. They wiped out the Russian Navy. But they wiped out the Russian Navy. Yes, you wipe out the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. It's terrible. The Americans still have the Atlantic Fleet. You wipe out Task Force Z. It's annoying. The Royal Navy would rather have Task Force Z operational and available, but they have other battleships, they have carriers, they have other ships to come in. In the end, they've lost 2 ships, they've lost those crews, and they'd rather not lose them, but they are going to replace them, they're going to come back. So I think the problem is that there is no real scenario in which the Kantai-Kessen actually works, because it strategically doesn't understand properly what they're facing. And that's it. Broken. Even if they managed to sink their entire USN fleet at that point, the giant industrial juggernaut would have replaced it. Probably. Then I was thinking fleet air arm as well, but that explosion makes a lot of sense for coastal command. Walton 92. Turned out £25 ones were able to punch holes even underwater, where the H8 ones went boom instead. That would be interesting. That would make a lot of sense. I think the reason that... It's going to sound strange. When I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking that the main plants I think about rockets are the ones the British have in the Far East, and for the British Pacific Fleet and Indian Ocean Fleet, Eastern Fleet. So they might have been concentrated on high explosive because more often than not they were carrying rockets for attacking land targets, and then they just used them for attacking ships. Great minute. £25 armor-piercing warheads on RP3s were found to be superior in punching holes in the hulls of ships with a waterline. In some cases, the solid shot would exit the other side or bottom of the ship. Steve Winnish. The ingenuity in Magnetron was pretty amazing. Making an oscillator in the tens of megahertz range without modern semiconductor opponents is seemingly impossible. Thanks for that. If more cruisers hit Pearl, would that have been worse? If more cruisers are hit at Pearl, then the Americans lose a considerable chunk of their escort force. If that's instead of the battleships, I don't know. I still doubt the Americans come charging out if they've lost the forces, the equivalent forces of cruisers that they have as battleships. Verican. No, I'm fairly sure the Italians came out and fought after Matapan, after Taranto. They come out and fight. They don't immediately surrender or anything like that, or immediately go, we need to be peace. They do fight, so I'll defend them on this one. Death Squad. Yeah, I think beyond whether it worked or not, as far as I know, the Japanese had no plan for what to do after the decisive battle when they asked the US to surrender and were told no. Then could you land troops using merchantmen disguised as neutrals at Pearl Harbor civilian facilities? You could try it, but I wouldn't put much faith in it. I would prefer to use the landing craft ships, etc. they have to get those troops fast onto a beach, attacking in the sort of early hours of dawn at the same time as the airstrikes are going in. Thank you, Alt92. Constance, I doubt that it happened, but there were US development of radar at full months before war. Yeah. Very saucy. Bring up merchants or passengers on the false flag to nearby. You could have done all sorts of things if you wanted to try. Coming up, Russo-Japanese War. IJM killed the 1st Pacific Squadron, Port Arthur, and then 2nd Pacific Squadron. Had the RN suffered similar losses compared to their size? No. But there again, the RN is a lot bigger than the Russian Navy was. Even in 1905, when the Russo-Japanese War happens, the RN's a lot bigger. This is the point. The Japanese are basing their strategy off dealing with smaller, less committed navies. If you consider, if you take out the equivalent number of ships, i.e. wipe out the entire Royal Navy, you're talking about 3-4 times as many ships. In 1905, the Royal Navy has, give or take it, 60 pre-dreadnoughts in service. The Russians have nowhere near that number. Or is it 40 pre-dreadnoughts? 40 or 60? That's an entirely different... Let me open up that one just to check. Live. Yeah, in 1905, the Royal Navy has nearly 40. Sorry, I was wrong. 40 pre-dreadnoughts in service. Russia post the war has 5 left in service. So, for you to wipe out the equivalent of the Royal Navy in Russo-Japanese War thing, you're talking about taking out 30 to 35 pre-dreadnoughts. In nicest way, if you manage to get into a battle position where you can take out that many British pre-dreadnoughts at once, you're going to need a lot more ships than even the Japanese managed at Tsushima. There's Scott. It's not like the IJN can follow the second half of Mahanian doctrine and strangle the US economy by dominating the trade lines with sea control. Well, this is one of those interesting things, because you would say no, right? We'd all say no. But when you're talking about American industry, a lot of it is located on the Atlantic. If you want to move stuff over to the Pacific, you have very limited railroad options, to use the American phrase, and you tend to have to bring a lot of things round by ship through the Panama Canal. So really, if you had some long-range submarines that could do really long range, and you could position them off the American Pacific coast with working torpedoes and guns, they could cause a lot of trouble for the Americans. They wouldn't win long term. It wouldn't win. None of these things would actually win it for the Japanese. They would extend the war. They wouldn't win it. This is the point. You go through these options and go, yes, that would extend it. It's a brilliant idea. Of course, this is damage to the Americans. But then you go, well, hang on. The Americans will just build up a massive fleet the other side on the Atlantic and will bring it round and then clear their coast. And then they'll move on. So it buys them time. Nothing wins it for them. There is no way to win when you're fighting a continent. So the RN never got that relative beating. That's why they keep on coming. Yes and no, because then you've got the Anglo-Dutch wars. The RN do get, thanks to what happens at Chatham, they do lose a lot of ships. And there are various battles with the French during Revolutionary Wars, Napoleonic Wars, and the wars which precede them, where they lose a lot of ships. And they still keep on coming. So yes, relatively, you can say, in the modern terms, they haven't had a similar losses. But again, you can't inflict the similar losses on that size of force. That's the thing. This is the point I'm trying to make. They're different fleets. The American and the British fleets are far, far bigger. You wipe out a fleet of the American or the Brits, and another fleet will soon turn up. That's what happened. Force C gets wiped out. Do the Japanese immediately have control of the Indian Ocean? No. Why? Because within days, another fleet is in there. Under Admiral Somerville, with battleships, with aircraft carriers. The British build the fleet up. Yes, the Force C was limited for deterrence reasons because of the limitations of the other operations, but they do it when they have to. The USN could take 3 biddings and they would still keep coming. They knew the odds were bet in their favour. That's good. One of the many scenarios in history where the only way to win is not to play. Like a boxer who lets the opponent punch themselves to exhaustion and then lands the haymaker. Pretty much. The only way the Japanese win the war is if something sufficiently concerning happens elsewhere and the Americans can no longer think about the Japanese. Yeah, it's basically how the Americans won the War of Independence. No. They also had other advantages in that one. Anyway, I'm going to be naughty and say I've got to go get some food because I am starving, as I haven't eaten so far today, other than, as you saw, some Pringles. So, thank you very much everyone for watching. Thank you to everyone who's done super chats. Thank you to everyone who has done who's a patron. Thank you to everyone who's joined the channel and using those emojis. Thank you to everyone, basically, therefore, who's funding my research now. And thank you to everyone who's watched the adverts, because again, Funds the research. Thank you to everyone who's watched this evening and asked questions. I hope you enjoyed this. And thank you to everyone who has liked, and thank you to everyone who shared the videos. Take care, Daniel Phillips. Take care, Steve Winrish, John Shea, Alistair Crowd. Take care. Dep Squad, thank you. Take care. DGV40, take care. Old Richard, take care. Verican. Wait, what? The Japanese needed French help? Possibly. Ben Grogan, thank you. Take care. Walt92, thank you. Ferry Kedden? No to that one. Alright. Frank Smarto, next live show will be on the 11th of July when I'm back from my research trip, and it'll be a brew ships. Grace Darcy, I think if the Japanese had gambled on only the Philippines rather than hitting your sword, they might have got away with it. Doubtful, but they could have tried. They might well have got their Kantai-Kessen battle when the Americans hadn't really built up for it. Take care, Asa Crown. Take care, Grace Darcy. Take care, Karl Von Gasberg, and Steve Winish. Derp Squad, thank you. Matthias Slavik, thank you. Right, Summer, thank you. Take care. Frank Spandos, take care. Costras, thank you. Take care. Steve Winish, take care. Scorpio26511, thank you. Take care. Kahedron, thank you. And Staff Thompson and Richard Alter, thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Thank you. And have a nice evening. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.